Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Last spring, I decided to go camping alone in a forest, about an hour and a half drive from my apartment in Portland. I didn't have anything specific in mind beyond spending a day outdoors and then returning home. Even though I didn't have much camping experience, I figured it wouldn't be a problem since it was just one night away from civilization. When I arrived at the main camping trail entrance, I noticed there were 4 cars parked along the roadside. I really wasn't in the mood to interact with anyone or spend the day surrounded by people. So I continued driving until I found another trail about 2 miles further down the road. There wasn't proper parking, so I had to drive even further ahead and then walk back. This second trail was much narrower, all dirt-packed without gravel or anything that indicated it was a frequently used spot. I started walking along it, and the terrain was fairly flat with nothing but trees and bushes surrounding me in every direction. After about 3 hours of hiking, the trail kept getting narrower and narrower, until I wasn't really sure if I was still on the right path. From the beginning, I kind of sensed that something like this might happen. But after 3 hours of walking, I decided not to worry about it and simply pressed on. Eventually, I turned around and started heading back, trying to find the more well-defined part of the path. However, just 10 minutes later, something made me stop suddenly. A cabin in the middle of the forest. My first reaction was to think that I must be completely lost. After all, I hadn't seen it when I passed by earlier. But I was quickly overcome by a strange sensation. What would a cabin be doing right there? I approached slowly, and since there was no door, I peered inside. It was a mess, full of debris and old trash. The longer I stayed there, the more fear grew inside me. I decided to turn around and return to the trail, but I was interrupted by a loud sound behind me. I looked back toward the cabin and saw through the entrance a man emerge from behind the wall. He appeared to be middle-aged, wearing torn clothes, and looked like he lived there. He stared at me with a strange, emotionless expression. Feeling nervous, I said sorry while quickly backing away. I looked back once and saw that he was still watching me as I distanced myself. I spent the next hour in a state of high alert, scanning every corner of the trail and making sure I wasn't being followed. When the sun began to set, my concern only increased, but fortunately, before it got completely dark, I found the central point of the trail. I thought about going straight back to the car, but I ended up deciding to spend the night right there just to make sure I wouldn't get lost again. I took off my backpack, set up the tent, and then lay down inside it. I had planned to make a campfire and do several other things, but at that point, I no longer had the energy for anything other than resting. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, everything was completely dark, and the only sound I could hear was the creaking of the forest around me. I turned my head, and my eyes went straight to the tent entrance. There, peering through a slightly open gap, was the man's face covered by shadows. He was staring at me. I jumped back, and he did the same. I I heard his footsteps moving away quickly as I rushed outside to look, seeing only his back disappearing into the forest. With my heart still racing, I quickly dismantled everything, threw it in my backpack, and followed the trail back to the car with maximum caution. I can't even begin to imagine what that man was about to do while I was sleeping. But the image of him watching me through the darkness is a horrible scene that still hasn't left my head. Obviously, I never went back there. And to this day, I avoid talking about it because I know I'll never have answers. Last summer, I decided to take a few days off work to go hiking and camping. I chose a small creek near my parents' house in rural Montana, where I had spent some peaceful moments before. I was visiting them for a few days, and after that planned to head out alone to camp by the creek for 2 or 3 nights before returning home. I don't live in a state that offers many outdoor adventures, so whenever I'm in their town, I take advantage of the opportunity to reconnect with nature. After spending time with my parents, I put my backpack on and set off for the trail. The walk to the creek took around 5 hours of hiking if I maintained a steady pace. The good thing was that it was a practically deserted route. Nobody passed through there. The creek itself wasn't much to look at, and there were other trails that were much more beautiful and well marked in the region. This route, however, was just a dirt trail that was quite discreet and barely visible. I reached the creek late in the day with the sun almost setting and immediately set about pitching my tent. I lit a campfire to relax a bit before sleeping. After a few minutes sitting there, I started hearing footsteps approaching. I looked around and after a while saw a man emerge from among the trees. He waved at me and walked toward my campsite with a smile on his face. The man seemed like an ordinary person, maybe in his early 30s, although he was somewhat dirty and unkempt, as if he had been camping out there for some time. He introduced himself as Will and started making conversation, commenting that his campsite wasn't very far away. I went along with the conversation more out of politeness than interest, but I couldn't help feeling that there was something strange about the situation. After a while, he said goodbye and left. I watched as he walked along the creek bank with a flashlight, but after about a minute, the light simply went out and everything fell silent. At first, I didn't pay much attention to the encounter, but something about that man left me uneasy. What bothered me most was the fact that he had appeared right after I lit the campfire. He must have been very nearby, as if he was watching me or following me. I tried to calm my nerves by convincing myself that it was just a coincidence. After all, the guy had introduced himself and talked to me, which made me think he wouldn't have done that if he had any bad intentions. I put out the fire and lay in the tent for a while trying to sleep until I finally fell asleep. The next day I woke up with the sunrise and spent the day exploring the creek banks. Strangely, I didn't find any other campsite or signs of fires or pitched tents, not even in the direction the man had gone. I thought maybe he was camping further into the forest, but that only increased my feeling of discomfort. When I returned to my tent just before nightfall, I was shocked to find Will sitting beside my extinguished campfire. "Can I help you with something?" I asked. He smiled again and said he was waiting for me to return because he had discovered something downstream. Then he got up and started walking, suggesting I come along to see what he had found. I hesitated. "I'm going to stay here, Will. I'm a bit tired." He stopped, turned around, and stared at me with the same smile on his face, insisting that I accompany him. We stared at each other for several seconds that seemed like an eternity, and that's when I was certain something was wrong. His smile began to fade, and he asked again, this time in a more serious and less friendly tone. I chose not to respond, and after a few seconds, he turned and started walking toward the creek. As I watched him walk away, I noticed the outline of a small gun showing under his shirt, tucked in the back of his pants. Although it's not that strange to carry a weapon in the forest, I've never seen anyone carry it that way, kind of uncomfortably, with the shirt over it. The only explanation would be that he was trying to hide the gun from other people, which doesn't make much sense in such an isolated place. After seeing that, I started dismantling my campsite as quickly as I could, and in less than an hour, I was on the trail back. Luckily, I was able to orient myself even in the dark, and reached my car after about 5 hours of walking. The more I reflect on this experience, the more frightening it becomes. I'm almost certain he was following me from the beginning, but I don't know for how long or to what extent. The fact that he tried to lure me to the creek was almost certainly an attempt at something terrible. And I think if I hadn't left when I did, he probably would have come back that night, and I would never have been seen again. One of my best friends, let's call him Lucas, and I had the habit of camping once or twice a year. Back in college when we were roommates, we did this more frequently. But now that we both work full-time, it became harder to coordinate. Lucas was the one who introduced me to the world of camping, since he's been doing it since childhood. I, on the other hand, had never camped before meeting him. This story happened about 3 years ago during one of our annual summer trips. We didn't go anywhere too far away. Basically, we followed a trail for about 3 hours, set up our tents, and organized everything. The main focus was camping, not taking long hikes, and we usually stayed for about 5 or 6 days. When we found a nice spot, we set up camp and just chilled. The next 4 days were what you might imagine. We sat around the campfire, had some beers, and chatted. We took some short walks and played some card games too. But overall, the idea was just to relax. That had always been the plan. On the 5th day, we decided to wrap up the campsite and would return the next morning. When the sun started to go down, we prepared to light the fire once more. Lucas mentioned he was going to take a quick walk to get some dry branches and asked me to start preparing dinner. I did what he asked, but the sun disappeared over the horizon and he still hadn't returned. About 45 minutes had already passed. It wasn't exactly an eternity, but it seemed like a long time just to collect firewood. I started thinking that maybe he had gone out more to take a walk than to look for wood. I waited another 40 minutes. The sun had already completely disappeared, and darkness was taking over. I lit our strong flashlight to have extra light, but I knew the battery wouldn't last long if I kept it on all the time. That's when I started to really worry about Lucas. He was the most experienced in all of this, so it didn't make sense for him to get lost like that. I decided the best thing to do would be to light the campfire anyway, thinking that if he was disoriented, he could see the fire and find his way back. I grabbed the flashlight, collected some twigs, and used some matches to light the flame. When it had been over 3 hours since I last saw Lucas, and already 3 hours since nightfall, I heard a gunshot. The sound came from far away, kind of in the direction Lucas had gone. But what really terrified me was remembering that neither of us had brought a weapon. I stood up and walked in circles around the campsite before grabbing the flashlight and going out to try to find him. It didn't take long before I heard rapid footsteps running in my direction. My hand was shaking as I held the flashlight, but the beam only illuminated a few meters ahead. Soon I saw a figure approaching, and I could barely recognize Lucas. His eyes were wide. He looked terrified. I had never seen anyone with such a terrified expression before. He told me in a low, nervous voice that we needed to get out of there immediately. We ran back to the campsite, grabbed our backpacks, and left the rest behind. I asked what had happened, but he refused to explain until we were out of the forest. It was only then that he told me he had encountered someone out there during the walk. A man had approached and forced him to follow, pointing a gun and telling him to stay quiet. Before they reached their destination, Lucas managed to escape, and that's when I found him running. That was all he told me, and it's always been all he's told me every time I bring up the subject. It's clear that he's hiding some important parts, but he never opens up about the rest. Something he always omits is the gunshot. He never mentioned that. I personally know that Lucas is a guy who knows how to handle himself. It wouldn't be strange to think that maybe he managed to disarm the man. Maybe he got the gun and did what he needed to do to escape. That would explain the state of shock he was in and why the man didn't pursue him. I still don't know exactly what happened that night, but since then, Lucas has never wanted to camp again. And being honest, neither have I. I just wish I knew the truth about what really happened. I had an old RV that I used all the time as shelter for camping in the forests behind my house in northern Idaho. It was basically junk, but that didn't bother me since I only drove it a few miles, parked it, and spent several days there. I didn't need anything luxurious. A few years ago, I took this RV for a weekend camping trip, as I usually did. I took a dirt road for about 2 miles and found a little spot among the trees where I set up my camp. I made a small fire, put chairs around it, and sat down to relax while having some drinks. Usually I brought friends with me, but they couldn't always take several days off work. So that time, it was just me enjoying my own company. When the sun started to disappear, I added more wood to the fire. As soon as it got completely dark, I started hearing something moving in the surrounding area. The noise wasn't typical of wild animals. It sounded more like someone walking among the trees. I looked in that direction, but couldn't see anything. This continued for about 30 minutes, always the sound of footsteps around my campsite. I decided to put out the fire and take shelter in the RV. I locked the door, and for about an hour and a half, I kept peeking through the windows trying to see something, but I saw absolutely nothing. Of all the times I had camped in this forest, I had never seen anyone pass by my campsite, so that was far from normal. Besides, knowing that this person was wandering around in the dark, without even a flashlight, made everything even stranger. Before sleeping, I checked the locks twice just to be sure. Fortunately, I managed to sleep well. When I woke up in the morning, I prepared coffee, had my breakfast, and stayed inside the RV for several more hours before thinking about going out. I even wanted to take a longer hike, but I wasn't very comfortable leaving the RV there, knowing that someone had been walking around nearby. I ended up opting for a short walk. I went to the place where I had heard the footsteps the night before, trying to find some trail or footprint that would confirm if it was really a person. But I found nothing that helped me. I can't say if this made me feel more calm or even more uneasy. But when I returned to the RV, I decided to get my gun and put it on my belt just to be safe. When it got dark again, I lit the fire and tried to push away negative thoughts. I stayed outside for a while, maybe an hour and a half, and was relieved not to have heard anything strange. I had a beer and enjoyed the peaceful sounds of the forest until sleep came. I got up and went to put out the fire when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure. My head turned quickly to look. It was standing there among the trees, about 25 feet away, illuminated by the weak light of the fire, just watching me. It was only a few seconds before it turned and disappeared into the darkness, moving out of the light's reach. I was really terrified, and the fact that I didn't hear any more footsteps or movement only increased my paranoia about where this person could be. I grabbed everything that was outside and took it inside the RV, put out the fire, and locked myself in there again. At that moment, I started considering the idea of packing everything up and going home in the morning, because I could already tell that this camping experience would no longer be pleasant. Whoever was out there had now appeared at my RV twice, and neither time had they said anything or shown themselves properly. I spent hours on alert, repeatedly checking the windows and listening to every small sound around. It was during the 4th hour of watch, when I was dozing in the chair, that I heard footsteps rapidly approaching the RV, coming straight for the door. I remained motionless, holding my pistol and hoping nothing would happen. There were a few strange seconds when I heard nothing more. They just stood there on the other side of the door. Then they started walking slowly around the RV, and then suddenly ran away. I stayed awake until dawn, and as soon as daylight appeared, I packed everything and headed back home. Whoever was out there certainly didn't have good intentions to approach my RV like that in the middle of the night. I knew that if I stayed, things could have ended very badly for one of us, and I wasn't willing to take the risk of it being me. I was on a camping trail in the northern Appalachian Mountains. I think it's been about 6 years now. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just a new trail I wanted to explore. I had done several hikes in that mountain range before, so I felt quite confident about camping and continuing through there. I had planned, based on the research I did beforehand, to spend 4 days on the trail with 3 nights camping. The first part of the route was well marked, but as I advanced, the path began to become less clear. Even so, I kept going until some things started to make me doubt, and I began to wonder if I was still on the right path. I checked my map, compass, and even some notes on my phone that I made during preparation. After taking a good look, I was about 90% sure I had strayed from the main trail. The problem was that the map didn't show other routes around there, so I really wasn't sure where I was. I decided to go back the way I came in an attempt to get back on the correct trail. but it was already starting to get dark. I didn't want to risk getting even more lost, so I decided to set up camp right there. I didn't bother making a complete campsite setup. I just put up the tent, and that was it. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and fell asleep quickly. A few hours later, I woke up. From what I remember, it was just because I needed to use the bathroom. But when I opened the tent zipper and walked to the trees, I saw a glow in the distance. It was the clear, flickering glow of a campfire. My first reaction was to think that maybe another person had gotten lost around there too. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the chance of that happening was minimal. Besides, it was already around 3 in the morning, and a campfire lit at that hour was quite strange. I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep peacefully with someone nearby, and I'd only feel safe if I knew they were other campers. My brilliant idea was to light my own campfire, hoping that when they saw it, they would notice my presence, if they hadn't already noticed. If there were any bad intentions, at least they would know I was awake. I made a flame big enough to be seen, but it didn't take even 15 minutes, and their campfire was extinguished. My heart raced. There was no way this was just a coincidence. I spent the rest of the night on alert, always looking outside for any sign of whoever was out there, but nothing else happened. When day broke, I dismantled the tent and packed my things, but curiosity got the better of me. If they were other campers, maybe they knew the right way back. With my pistol strapped to my chest for safety, I went toward the place where the campfire had come from. When I got there, the place was empty, but you could clearly see that there had been a recent campfire. I also found several footprints around there, and a little further ahead, a small cabin or maybe a shelter. It didn't look like something improvised. I approached carefully and peeked through the half-open door. Inside, the musty smell revealed the age of the place. But what caught my attention were the piles of camping equipment. There was everything: tents, hiking poles, backpacks, everything a camper could need. And the most curious thing was that it was all expensive equipment, none of those cheap things you see around. From the way things were piled up in there, it didn't seem to be from a single person, or even from a single time period. Some of the things were new, while others looked much older. I turned around and started back quickly. Luckily, I stumbled over a rock that I remembered seeing on the way there. And from there, I managed to find the right trail again. I followed back the same way and got out of there as fast as I could. As a precaution, I ended up notifying the police, but nothing came of it. I think they never got around to investigating the area. From what I deduced, whoever was there must have been stealing equipment from campers, maybe diverting people from the main path. I have no idea how they managed to do this, or if anyone who fell into this trap managed to get out. But I think I came very close to finding out in practice. When I was a kid, my family always took these big camping trips every year. I would get super excited since we lived in Nevada, where there wasn't much interesting stuff. We would go camping in Colorado to see trees and grass. That was what I loved most. But another incredible part was meeting all my cousins. Despite seeing each other only a few times a year, we were very close. Louis, my favorite cousin, was like a brother to me. He was 2 years older, and we were inseparable when we were together. After a certain camping trip, we became even closer. It took us a while to really understand what happened and what could have happened that day. It all started when we had already been camping for 3 days. Almost the entire family was either at the lake or around the campfire talking. Louis didn't like swimming, so we went to play in the forest. Our favorite game was a version of tag called cops and robbers. We would take turns. One was the cop and the other the robber, and the objective was to catch the other one by running. We spent hours at this, but the forest is the kind of place where you keep running, and suddenly you don't know where you are anymore. We tried to always stay within sight of each other, but when Louis started chasing me with a huge branch, my adrenaline shot through the roof. I have no idea how long I ran, but I ended up stopping in front of a very old trailer. Louis wasn't far away, and I remember him dropping the branch on the ground with his attention completely focused on the trailer that we thought was abandoned. We talked about whether we should go in or not, and for some reason we decided to leave it alone. We turned around and started to go back, but we had no idea where we were. After walking for some time, we saw a couple coming in our direction, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman approached us with a friendly smile, while the man stayed further away. She asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names and ages. I remember when we said how old we were. She gave a look at the guy and then looked back at us. She said we didn't need to be afraid, that she would help us get back to the campsite after they left their things at their campsite. She also said we could make s'mores if we wanted. Louis and I were a bit suspicious, but she seemed really nice, and it was still light out, so for some reason that made everything seem less weird to my 7-year-old mind. In my head, bad people only do wrong things at night, so we thought we were safe. We walked with them for a while, following them to their campsite while she talked to Louis. I looked at the shopping cart they were pushing. It was full of rusty metal things, and nothing looked new. It was just a bunch of junk that looked like they had found it lying around. I started feeling very uncomfortable, and noticed Louis wasn't comfortable either. Every time I looked at the guy, he didn't smile, and sometimes he would stare at me with that empty look. This happened 20 years ago, and I still remember how he gave me the creeps. We walked a bit more until the trailer appeared again. The woman held my hand and Louis's hand and asked if we were excited to make s'mores. Suddenly, I heard someone calling Louis's name and then mine. Everyone stopped for a moment, and I felt the woman squeeze my hand tighter. She asked the man something about what they should do. He answered, but I don't remember what it was. The woman started guiding us toward the trailer, holding our hands tighter and tighter and speeding up the pace, almost as if she was in a hurry. When I looked back, I saw my sister among the trees. Without thinking twice, I shouted her name, and the lady immediately let go of my hand. Louis and I ran toward her while she came to us. My sister shouted to the others that she had found us. My parents thanked the couple, who made up a detailed story about how they were trying to help us find our parents for a while, and how we were adorable kids and such. I remember my parents even inviting the couple to have hamburgers with us, but fortunately, they declined. I think because the woman was so kind and everything ended well, my parents didn't suspect anything. Still, I remember my dad and my uncle commenting that the guy had a really weird way about him. Later, my cousin and I ended up telling my sister that we found the couple very strange. But I don't know if she understood what we were trying to say. It was only later, when we were older, that we were able to realize that some people have really bad intentions. We talked about it more calmly and came to the conclusion that apparently that couple was having financial problems and probably wanted to sell us or something like that. For many years, I kept this from my parents because I felt like I needed to be the strong man of the family. And thinking about that day made me feel vulnerable, as if I had been easy prey. Louis also felt ashamed since he was older and thought he had failed to protect me. Years later, we ended up telling this story to our parents. But I keep thinking that if we had told them earlier, maybe something could have been done. Nowadays, I never take my eyes off my children and always make it clear that they can tell me anything without fear of being judged. I went camping with a college friend. To preserve our privacy, I'll call him Andrew. We had known each other for almost 2 years, and both were passionate about trails and the forest. But until then, we had never spent a night outdoors together. This happened during spring break at our university, and we had been planning this trip for some time. We chose a trail we knew well, and even had an idea of where to set up camp. On the scheduled day, we set off without hesitation. We were excited to realize that the trail was completely empty. Actually, that was one of the reasons we had chosen that path, since we knew it was rarely frequented. We hiked about 12 miles into the forest until we reached the area where we wanted to set up camp. We pitched our tents and prepared a simple meal just before sunset. Andrew and I gathered some large rocks and branches to make a campfire, which we lit as soon as night fell. Somewhat irresponsibly, we brought a case of beers and started drinking while chatting around the fire. We had good conversations and had a lot of fun, but after a few hours, we were ready to sleep. We put out the fire and went to our tents to rest. I ended up falling asleep quickly because of the peaceful sounds of nature. But during the night, I kept waking up several times. It wasn't because of any specific noise, but I would just suddenly open my eyes for no apparent reason. I thought maybe it was just the fact that I wasn't used to spending the night in the forest, but it made me a little uncomfortable. On one of those times, maybe the 5th or 6th, I heard Andrew's tent zipper being opened. I thought he was probably going out to use the bathroom or something, but he only took a few steps before starting to rummage through his backpack. About 45 seconds passed without any other sound. It was as if he had stopped right outside the tent. I sat up and eventually opened my own tent zipper to take a look. As soon as I started to open it, I heard Andrew's footsteps quickly moving away from the front of my tent. And when I stuck my head out, I saw he was crouched down hurriedly, putting something away in his backpack. He turned and looked at me with a worried expression. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He stared at me for a moment before nodding, but something there struck me as strange immediately. I got out of the tent and stood up, asking what he was doing outside. He replied that he was having trouble sleeping and decided to go out to get some air. But while he was talking, I noticed that sticking out from the top of his backpack was the handle of a gun. I felt my face lose color as I stared at Andrew, trying as much as possible to hide my reaction. But he already knew I had seen it. We stood in silence, looking at each other for a few very strange seconds, until he turned and went back inside his tent without saying a word. I had never seen him act that way, and you could tell from his face that he was hiding something. It was already weird that he had never mentioned bringing a gun, but the way he was acting just made everything more disturbing. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting on the ground outside the tents, waiting for the sun to rise. As soon as it got light, I gathered my things and left. After that day, Andrew never contacted me again, which for me only confirms that there was something wrong that night. I don't know for sure what could have happened or why, but I'm certain I was lucky to get out of there before finding out. My family had a few cabins in Oregon where we liked to spend time or have family gatherings from time to time. But on this trip, I was alone. I had just turned 21 and had never camped on my own. So I thought camping near the cabins would be a good idea in case something went wrong. I drove for about an hour and a half, and then walked another 40 minutes along a trail that led to the cabin where I planned to camp nearby. When I was arriving, I noticed that one of the windows was missing. There was no broken glass on the ground. It looked like the entire window had been removed, which was very strange to see. Although I had no intention of entering the cabin, I had brought the key for emergencies, and that seemed like a situation that deserved a closer look. I was even more intrigued when the door simply opened without me needing to unlock it. I went in and it quickly became clear that the place had been broken into. The floor was full of muddy footprints, and some valuable objects had disappeared. It was sad to see, but it was impossible to know when all that had happened. As far as I knew, it had been months since anyone had gone to the cabins, and even then, not everyone used this particular one. I did my best to lock the cabin before leaving in search of a place to camp. I was without cell signal, but I didn't feel like I needed to notify my family immediately, nor did I think it necessary to call the police for now. I walked about 45 minutes downhill until I found a relatively flat area to set up camp. It started to rain, and since I didn't have much experience with this, it took me a few hours to get everything right. Already soaked, I sat on a nearby log under a tree and started eating some prepackaged food. Suddenly, I heard someone talking. Soon, I noticed a man walking behind me. He was soaked, going up the hill toward the cabin, and it seemed like he hadn't seen me yet. The way he was talking was very strange. It didn't make any sense at all, and you could see he was talking to himself. In a few minutes, he disappeared from my sight, but something about that scene left me uneasy. After an hour, I decided to take a quick look at the cabin to see if he was around there. But from a distance, the place seemed as empty as before, so I returned to the campsite. When night came, I used my fire kit to light a small fire and heat up some of the food I had brought. The rain interfered a bit, but after the fire caught, it stayed steady. It didn't take long for me to hear footsteps coming from the hill. I looked toward the trees, but all I could see was darkness beyond the reach of the campfire. The footsteps continued until a man appeared. I couldn't see very well, but he seemed like the same man I had seen before. "Hey, what do you want?" I shouted, trying to drive him away. He stopped and looked at me with an empty expression, rain dripping down his head while he just stood there. I shouted again, but he didn't move. We were only a few meters apart, and with each second, I became more terrified of what could happen. That's when I heard the sound of a single footstep behind me. In the rain, on impulse, I started running downhill and only stopped when my legs couldn't take it anymore. I don't think they followed me, but between the wind and rain, it was hard to hear anything while I was fleeing. I managed to climb to the top of the hill, and even in the rain, I walked to the car, using only the light from my cell phone. As soon as I got to an area with signal, I called emergency services. In the days that followed, a team was sent to investigate the cabin and the place where I had camped. My campsite was no longer there. Only a few useless pieces of equipment remained. At the cabin, however, they found 4 different footprints on the floor. This left me panicked for weeks, just thinking that there were 4 strange men around there, hidden not very far from me. They didn't find anything else, and said it was probably just a burglary since they didn't come after me. But who can guarantee what they would have done if I had stayed? I like to take several small camping adventures throughout the year. I try to keep these adventures under 4 days in duration, so I can do them on weekends and only need to take 1 or 2 days off work. This was just another camping trip I planned for a weekend in mid-April. My plan was more or less to hike for about 6 hours to a small lake, set up camp there, and spend a couple of nights before returning. On the morning of the scheduled day, I took the car and set off, starting the hike around 8 o'clock. This lake didn't have trails leading to it, which was one of the reasons I decided to hike there. Since it was only a 6-hour hike, I wasn't too worried about getting lost, and I knew I wouldn't have to share the place with various random people who also wanted to camp. However, after 5 hours of hiking, I had the sensation of seeing someone. I was a bit distracted when something quickly passed through my field of vision. I stood still, trying to understand what or who had passed and where they went, but I saw no more movement. I wasn't looking directly when it happened, so I didn't have a clear enough view to be sure it was a person. But from then on, I paid more attention during the last hour of hiking. When I reached the lake, I was amazed by the beauty of the place. It was the perfect setting to take a break. It didn't take long for me to choose the spot to set up my campsite among the trees near the water. Almost as soon as I finished setting everything up, I saw someone, this time for sure. The person was on the other side of the lake, walking among the trees. They weren't carrying a backpack or anything, just walking around. I kept looking around trying to find some sign of a campsite, but I didn't see anything. After about 2 minutes, the person went into the woods and didn't come back. This made me a little uncomfortable. Knowing there was someone else around such an isolated lake made me start to doubt whether I had really seen someone earlier during the hike. I decided to stay at my campsite for the rest of the night, and when it got dark, I lit a fire. I kept it small so as not to draw too much attention. It had been almost 5 hours since I saw that person, but I was still somewhat apprehensive. I prepared something to eat and then opened a book to pass the time. I read a few pages, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I knew it was probably my head playing tricks, still nervous from what had happened earlier. But after a few minutes, I couldn't focus on reading anymore. I put the book away and organized my things inside the tent, preparing to sleep. Just before putting out the fire, I took one last look around. About 50 feet away, someone was standing, Even in the darkness, I knew the person was looking at me. Motionless, we stared at each other in the middle of the dark forest. We stayed like that for a full 2 minutes until the person started to move away. They kept staring at me but slowly backed away until they disappeared among the trees, swallowed by the darkness. I was trembling. What were they doing there, and would they come back? I increased the fire and stayed awake all night, unable to close my eyes. As soon as the day started to lighten, I packed my things as quickly as possible and started the hike back. I had no desire to spend another second in that place. While I was hiking back, at various moments, I swear I heard footsteps right behind me. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel my body tense up from the fear I felt during that trip. I have no idea who that person was, what they wanted, or what they were doing there. But from the way they were following me, it didn't seem like anything good. If I had stayed another night or decided to sleep in the tent, I'm almost certain that today I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Last year, something unusual happened for the first time in one of my camping trips. I used to camp alone several times a year, usually returning to the same places. But sometimes I like to vary and explore new spots. For this trip, I chose an 8-mile trail that I had never done before. I drove for about 3 hours from my house to a very isolated point where I started the hike. Right away, I noticed that the trail wasn't as pleasant as I had imagined, mainly because some parts were wet and full of mud. Even so, I kept going, trying to avoid those more complicated sections. I hiked for a good while, and after about an hour, I saw something beside the trail. It was a tent, but it was very old and torn in some places. From a distance, you could see there was nobody inside, so I decided to get closer. It didn't seem like anyone had damaged the tent on purpose. It looked more like wear from time. The curious thing is that despite the state of the tent, it was still standing, which surprised me quite a bit. I looked around and inside it, but strangely, there was nothing else. I thought I would find several abandoned things around there, but there was absolutely nothing besides the tent. After a few minutes, I returned to the trail. That stayed on my mind for a while, but I couldn't think of any good reason for someone to leave a tent in that condition. During the last 2 hours of hiking, I came across dozens of abandoned objects along the way. Everything was camping or hiking equipment, but seeing so many things scattered along an 8-mile trail gave me a strange feeling. Who would abandon everything like that? It didn't seem like it had been an accident, and I was almost certain that everything belonged to the same person. When I finally reached the end of the trail, I set up my tent at a safe distance, just as a precaution. It was already starting to get dark, so I stayed around there until bedtime. Despite feeling a little anxious, I managed to sleep through the night without problems. When I woke up, it was still quite early. The sun hadn't even fully risen. I opened the tent and went out, but I soon noticed something was wrong. When I turned around, on the other side of my tent, there was a man standing just a few meters from me. He was tall and thin, with filthy clothes, and his face covered with dirt and soot. His eyes had an empty look that froze me in place. I was so scared and shocked that for a moment, everything seemed surreal. "Get out," he said with a soft but strangely threatening voice. I nodded and started gathering my things quickly, but he advanced in my direction. I stumbled backward, and all I could say was okay, repeating it over and over. He continued staring at me with that empty look. "Get out," he repeated. This time I understood the message and got up quickly, running as fast as I could, leaving everything behind. Before completely disappearing from sight, I looked back and saw the man going through my backpack like a curious animal. I ran with all my strength, and when I couldn't take it anymore, I continued walking fast until I reached the car. Luckily, I had kept my cell phone and keys in my pocket, or that could have been much worse. As soon as I got signal, I called 911. That's when I discovered there had already been a case almost identical to mine. But the person who reported it chose not to disclose anything to the press. It was probably from whoever I found the tent and belongings scattered on the trail. After several days talking to the police and analyzing all the details, they organized a small search team to comb through the trail. The officers returned without signs of the man, but they found most of my things near where I had camped, scattered on the ground like they were trash. After that, the case went cold, just like what happened with the other person. What intrigues me most to this day is that the man didn't keep anything. He just threw everything in the forest without the slightest intention of using anything. Let me tell you about a terrifying experience I lived through. My friend Luke and I decided to camp in the heart of the forest, far from the most used trails and the hustle and bustle of the city. The weekend promised clear skies, and the idea of being immersed in nature, surrounded only by the soft sound of leaves and birdsong, seemed like the ideal refuge. Luke and I had been planning this trip for months, carefully choosing a remote spot where we could really disconnect from everything. We arrived at the beginning of the trail early in the morning, with the sun rising and spreading warm light over the dense forest. The air was fresh, loaded with the natural smell of pine and wet earth. We put on our backpacks loaded with supplies and began our journey. The path was narrow, winding between imposing trees whose branches intertwined, forming a natural ceiling that filtered sunlight into small spots on the ground. The further we advanced into the forest, the sounds of the outside world gradually disappeared. The only sound left was the rustling of leaves under our boots, and occasionally the call of a distant bird. As we continued forward, the forest seemed to close in more around us, with increasingly tall and dense trees, their rough and ancient bark. After several hours of walking, we found a small clearing ideal for setting up our camp. It was an open and welcoming space, surrounded by dense trees, with a soft carpet of moss under our feet. The clearing seemed isolated, almost like a secret refuge untouched by other adventurers. We set up our tent, gathered firewood to light the fire, and prepared for the night. As the sun disappeared on the horizon, the forest around us transformed. The birdsong gave way to the sound of crickets, their soft rhythm mixing with the crackling of the campfire. The flames danced, projecting long shadows on the trees, and the warmth of the fire was comforting in the cool night air. We had dinner while talking about light topics, enjoying the peace and simple pleasure of being away from everything. The night deepened, and the sky became a tapestry of stars. We decided to lie down, eager for a good night's sleep after the long walk. I woke up in the middle of the night. The fire had turned into glowing embers, and the silence in the forest was unsettling. I remained motionless for an instant, trying to understand what had interrupted my sleep. That's when I heard a soft sound right outside the tent. It sounded like the light crackling of something moving across the forest floor. I sat up slowly, feeling my heart accelerate. Luke was still sleeping deeply beside me. The sound echoed again, closer this time. I concentrated, trying to identify what it could be. Maybe an animal, a deer or a fox. However, there was something strange, an uncomfortable feeling that made a chill run up my spine. Carefully, I opened the tent zipper and peeked outside. Darkness dominated the forest, with trees rising like silent guardians. I examined the clearing, looking for the source of the noise, but everything seemed to be in order. The fire embers glowed weakly, casting pale light around, and there were no signs of movement or anything out of the ordinary. Relieved, I started to close the tent zipper again, but something caught my attention. Right at the edge of the clearing, where the tree shadows were denser, I noticed footprints. They were clear, well-defined marks in the soft ground, heading toward our tent. My heart stopped for an instant. They were too big to belong to an animal, and they were recent, certainly not there when we set up camp. I kept looking at the footprints, trying to understand what that meant. Who or what could have made them? We hadn't encountered anyone during the day, and we were many miles away from civilization. The idea of something or someone wandering in the dark, watching us, filled me with a feeling of uneasiness. I woke Luke with a light whisper, my voice almost inaudible. He grumbled softly, but seeing my expression, he quickly sat up completely alert. I pointed to the footprints, and his expression changed from confused to alarmed. We stayed silent, attentive to any noise, any sign that we weren't alone. That's when we heard the chanting. At first it was distant, so low it would have gone unnoticed if we hadn't been alert. A rhythmic, deep murmur, as if a voice were carried by the wind. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone caused discomfort, a monotonous sound that seemed to envelop the air around us. The chanting got louder, clearer, although the words remained incomprehensible. It came from the direction of the footprints, from the dense forest that surrounded our campsite. I felt my heart beat faster, and cold sweat ran down my body. Our gazes met, both too terrified to say a word. That's when we saw a figure emerge from the shadows, entering the weak light emitted by the fire embers. He was tall and thin, his clothes torn and filthy, hanging like rags on his body. Long, tangled hair covered most of his face, but what I could see of his eyes was enough to freeze my blood. They were empty, hollow, as if nothing human remained in them. He stood there, swaying slightly, with his lips moving in that strange chant. His voice was almost a whisper, but the words, whatever they were, seemed to vibrate around us, filling the clearing with a disturbing presence. Luke and I were paralyzed, unable to react or look away from the figure. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, he simply stood there, murmuring to himself, his unfocused eyes. Then suddenly, he lunged toward us with outstretched arms, and the chanting turned into a guttural scream. We threw ourselves backward, stumbling into each other in panic. Luke grabbed a branch from the fire, swinging it like a weapon. The embers lit up as he brandished the branch in the man's direction. The figure stepped back, letting out a low growl. For an instant, he seemed to hesitate, his empty eyes reflecting an emotion I couldn't identify. With one last frightening whisper, he turned and ran back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he had appeared. We didn't wait to see if he would return. We grabbed what we could and ran away, leaving behind the tent and most of our belongings. We ran through the forest, branches hitting our faces while the chanting still echoed softly in our minds. When we finally reached the beginning of the trail, exhausted and terrified, we collapsed on the ground, gasping. Only when the sun began to rise did we feel a little safer to move again. We reported what happened to the authorities, but they didn't seem surprised. They told us about the man, how he had lived in the forest for years, performing strange rituals and attacking anyone who ventured too far into his territory. We never returned to that forest. Even with the passing of years, the memory of that night still gives me chills. The man, his empty eyes, and the disturbing chanting remain alive in my memory, as a reminder of the darkness that can hide in the most remote places. I wasn't exactly what you'd call the social type back in college. My grades were mediocre at best. I wasn't part of any fraternity, didn't have a girlfriend, and honestly wasn't involved in much of anything. Happiness wasn't really my companion during those years, but I'm not complaining. Eventually, I met an incredible and loyal woman in my early 30s, who's always been by my side. Now my life is great. We live together, have 2 cats named Milo and Chester, and I'm planning to propose soon. Since I never joined a fraternity, those typical frat parties weren't part of my scene. Still, I wanted to have some fun. Who doesn't, right? My friends Blake and Ian were in the same boat. We spent most weekends lounging around Ryan's dorm room, but whenever a party opportunity came up, we jumped at it. The parties we could get into usually happened off campus, which meant they had no connection to fraternities or the college. Just to give you an idea, we once drove over an hour just to attend a party. You could say we were pretty desperate. One Friday afternoon, Ian sent a message to our group chat saying the girl he was seeing knew about a party nearby. He always attracted some interesting girls. You know the type I'm talking about. Ryan immediately joked that he didn't want to end up at some death metal, emo, or anime party, and I kind of agreed. But Ian was determined and assured us it would be a normal party. Since we didn't have anything better planned, we were convinced. Ryan even managed to get his brother Chris to be our designated driver. Chris didn't drink, so he was cool with the idea. Everything seemed to be falling into place. While we were heading to the party, Ian started complaining about the girl he'd been talking to. He said she hadn't responded for hours, which honestly wasn't surprising to anyone given the type of guy Ian was. He seemed really bothered, to the point where he mentioned thinking about skipping the party altogether. To us, that sounded like unnecessary drama. We'd already been on the road for half an hour, so turning back wasn't an option. We told him to hold it together and not let it ruin the night. After a few more minutes, Ian dropped the bombshell that Karen's profile had disappeared from his phone. We immediately realized he'd been blocked, and that she'd probably already found someone else to go to the party with. He sulked for the rest of the trip. When we finally arrived at the party, we knew right away we'd made a good choice. The house was massive, especially compared to the others on the block. But Ian still didn't want to go in, saying he needed to drink something to forget the situation. Ryan and I didn't see a problem with that, so we asked Chris to park a bit further away so we could drink outside the car. We grabbed some of the beers we'd brought and stood there watching crowds of people streaming into the house. The party looked pretty lively, to be honest. After Ian was satisfied with his level of intoxication, the four of us started walking toward the house. As soon as we stepped through the door, I felt something weird in the air. First off, all the lights were on, none of that ambient lighting. Just those harsh overhead lights that you'd normally expect to be turned off at a college party. And the people there were way too dressed up. Nothing like the kind of clothes you'd expect at a loud music party. It looked more like some fancy dinner party than anything else. Maybe that's just what it was, honestly. We didn't really have much idea what to expect exactly. We felt out of place, but the difference in dress code was quite noticeable. The music was weird too, at the very least. There was no trap, hip-hop, or any of those party sounds you'd expect. Instead, what was playing was something kind of ethereal, almost psychedelic. To be honest, I don't even know what genre it was or how to describe it. But none of the songs had lyrics, just instruments. It wasn't bad, but it was definitely strange. My friends and I exchanged glances, trying to understand what was going on. We pressed Ian for more details, but he was just as lost as we were. So we started walking around the house, exploring a bit. There was alcohol everywhere, so we helped ourselves. After a few minutes, I noticed some people staring at me and then quickly looking away. It was so obvious that I started wondering if I had something in my teeth or on my head. It made sense that the stares were because of my clothes. Despite the weird atmosphere, we were actually having a pretty good time. Well, except for Chris, who seemed kind of bored and ended up saying he was going out to smoke in the car. We figured it was because he hadn't been drinking anything, which probably explained his boredom. A few minutes after Chris left, a group of girls approached us. Truth is, we weren't exactly the most confident guys, so being approached like this was new for us. The three of them started flirting with us almost immediately. They didn't even try to hide it. They made a joke about charging an entrance fee, which I found funny until I realized they were serious. They were holding a bottle of tequila, and of course we weren't going to refuse. Without thinking much about it, and not wanting to seem uptight, we took a sip. After that, the six of us stayed together drinking, talking, and even dancing occasionally. Everything was going really well. At some point, I noticed a strange mark on Laura's neck. A thin, green line, like it had been drawn with a permanent marker. The line was so subtle that I probably wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been so close to her. I was unsure whether I should ask about it, but decided not to bring it up to avoid any misunderstanding. For all I knew, it could have been a birthmark or something like that. But after I noticed it, I couldn't stop looking. It seemed so out of the ordinary, and green of all colors. Who uses green makeup like that? It didn't look like makeup. I decided to let it go and kept flirting with her, trying to see how far things would go. After a while, I saw Ryan and the girl he was with going upstairs, which made me happy for him. Soon after, I noticed Ian and his girl also heading in the same direction. I was nervous about asking Laura for something more direct, afraid of ruining everything. Even with the alcohol, I was starting to get really anxious and sweaty. So I told Laura I was going to the bathroom and would be right back. The only bathroom I could find was occupied, so I waited outside the door. After a while, the door finally opened, and a really tall, older-looking guy came out. He was wearing a white dress shirt and linen pants. I rushed in, and he ended up bumping into me. I turned around expecting him to apologize, but the guy just stood there staring at me with an empty look, like he was analyzing me. It was really strange. I was about to say something when I noticed what was on his neck. The same green line I'd seen on Laura's neck. It was identical. Even though I knew it wasn't the best idea, I asked what his problem was. He smiled and shook his head, then said, "Who invited you?" Not knowing quite what to answer, I blurted out, "Karen, that girl who had ditched Ian." He laughed, looked up at the ceiling as if he knew who I was talking about, then looked back at me, but now without the smile. In a low voice, he repeated her name and gestured toward the party, saying, "Do you see Karen around here?" I didn't know what to say, so I simply slammed the door in his face. I was still trying to understand what had just happened. I couldn't get what he said out of my head, or that green line on his neck. Part of me regretted not asking more about what was going on there. I left the bathroom looking for him. I passed more people who looked at me like I didn't belong in that place, but I didn't care. I needed to find my friends and get everyone out of there. As I walked through the party, I couldn't get that green mark out of my head. I started looking more carefully at people's necks, trying to see if anyone else had a similar mark. To my horror, I saw 2 more people with those green lines on their necks. They were all identical. Same color, same size, same thickness. That was starting to really scare me. I kept looking for that guy while analyzing other people's necks. Most didn't have anything, but occasionally I'd see another green line on someone. I started getting really paranoid, so I decided to go upstairs to look for my friends. Fortunately, as soon as I started going up, I saw Ryan and Ian coming down. I called them both and led them to a quieter hallway so we could talk. I quickly explained my theory and said we needed to get out of there as soon as possible. They started laughing in my face, saying I was just drunk. Ryan even said I was jealous because they'd hooked up with someone and I hadn't. I asked where his girl was, and he said she'd asked him to meet her upstairs in 20 minutes. Ian said his girl had told him the same thing. I couldn't argue with them. They were all excited about having hooked up with someone. I told them to follow me, that I was going to prove that people had strange marks on their necks, but they didn't care. When I was about to give up, Ian turned to the side, and what I saw was horrible. There was a thin line on his neck, but this one was red, not green. I practically screamed at him, and finally they started listening to me. I inspected Ryan's neck too, and there was another red mark. Ian told me to relax, saying it was probably just a makeup stain, but Ryan started believing me. I said we had to leave, and Ryan and I turned to look for the door. Ian was still resistant, saying he wanted to meet up with the girl again. That's when some random guy walked past us, looking at each of us strangely. He didn't say anything, but stayed long enough for us to notice the green line on his neck. That was too much. Ryan and I ran for the door, and Ian came right behind us. It seemed like everyone at that party was staring at us as we left, but nobody did anything to stop us. We ran to Chris's car and told him to get us out of there as fast as possible. While we were driving away, Ian's and Ryan's phones started buzzing nonstop. The girls were asking why we'd left. How did they know if they weren't even around to see us leave? My friends ended up blocking the girls. Whenever I tell this story, everyone has a crazy theory about what happened that night. I honestly don't know what to think, but I'm also not sure I want to know what would have happened if that guy hadn't warned me. I'm doing my graduate work in civil engineering at Northwestern University. I started not too long ago, and until recently, I was in a pretty good phase. My classes were going well. I'd met some cool people, and the apartment I managed to get had a fair price. The only problem was the landlord, who seemed a bit sketchy. I had a car and lived far from campus, but I liked driving. The only downside was that the area was kind of dangerous, but that didn't bother me too much. I'm in my early 20s, so I thought I knew how to take care of myself. Things were a bit monotonous, but my focus was on getting my degree, not having fun. Everything was going well until the day my backpack got stolen. I left it on a table in some random hallway to make a quick trip to the bathroom, like an idiot. When I came back, it was gone. Of course, that specific auditorium didn't have cameras, so there really wasn't anything I could do. I was more frustrated than anything else. My wallet, keys, and laptop were in there. I had to cancel all my cards, notify the apartment manager about the keys, and start looking for a new laptop. It was just one big stress fest, but these things happen. But a few days later, I realized the situation was much more serious than I'd imagined. That night, I came back from campus and found a note under my door. I thought it was some message from the apartment manager, but it was far from that. When I opened the note, it just said, "I see you," no name, no signature, just those 3 words. Right away, I connected the dots. Whoever had stolen my backpack had gone through my laptop and found out where I lived. That alone would have been scary enough. But the worst part was that this person also had the keys to my apartment. My skin started itching, and I caught myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. I ran to my apartment and slammed the door shut. Fortunately, I had an internal deadbolt, so even if someone tried to get in, they wouldn't be able to get past it. During the following week, more notes arrived. They were all handwritten, short but full of strange messages, things like, "I know what you did," or "watch your back." By this point, I was starting to get really terrified. I'd never done anything really wrong, but if someone had gone through my laptop, who knows what they might have discovered. I was completely lost about what to do. Would going to the police help at all? I decided to wait a bit longer, hoping that whoever was bothering me would get tired of it soon. Then one night, while I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something strange. It was dark outside, and my blinds were slightly open, but I swear I saw a flash, like someone had taken a picture of me. I closed the blinds immediately, but my heart was already racing. I didn't see anyone out there, but it didn't stop there. I started noticing small changes in my apartment. At first, I thought I was just being absent-minded. My shoes would appear in different places, or my jacket that should have been hanging up was thrown over a chair. These were small things I could explain away if I wanted to. But then one day, I came home and found my sheets thrown on the floor and my room completely torn apart. The dresser drawers were all open, my books scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had searched the entire place. I called the police immediately, of course, but it didn't help much. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen, so they said there wasn't much they could do. I asked the landlord to change the locks, but he told me it would take at least 2 days to get someone. I begged him to do it faster, but he just shrugged and said it wasn't an emergency. I felt betrayed. How was this not urgent? I kept insisting, but he stopped responding no matter how much I tried. That was literally yesterday, as I'm writing this. I barely slept all night, even knowing I was safe with the internal deadbolt. I'm thinking about changing the locks myself, but I don't know how to do it without causing some expensive damage. I canceled all my classes this morning because I'm afraid to leave the apartment. I'm still here writing all this down. I'm prepared to face whoever it is if they come back. I'm sure that if they manage to access my laptop, they know my class schedule. Maybe I'll hide and catch them by surprise if they try to enter while I'm supposed to be in class. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'll give an update as soon as I can. I recently ended my 2-year relationship with David. It wasn't a horrible breakup, but it was far from peaceful either. The truth is, we'd been fighting for months, and you could clearly see it wasn't going to work out. When we decided to end it for good, I thought it would be the best thing to do. I blocked him on all social media, and that was that. We moved on. I study at Temple University and live in a tiny apartment right near campus. It's on the 2nd floor of an older building, which means I hear practically everything that happens outside. A few days after the breakup, I started noticing strange sounds during the night. They weren't the normal city sounds. These were different. They sounded like footsteps, soft movements, as if someone was right outside my window. At first, I thought it was all in my head, But over time, I accepted that it was probably David. The only reason I wasn't freaking out is because he'd always been a really sweet and harmless guy. I mean, he'd never do anything crazy, or that would hurt me. In my head, he was just missing me, so I decided to ignore it. I thought that sooner or later he'd give up. Besides everything else, I was already super stressed because of the breakup and still had a huge group project to deal with. This project, by the way, is an important part of this story. I was responsible for reviewing and submitting the final work to the professor. I spent the entire night adjusting every detail, making sure everything was perfect, and finally sent it by email, relieved, just before midnight. After that, I went to bed trying to push all the other things that were going wrong in my life out of my head. The next day, we had to present the video in class. The professor connected his laptop and opened the file I'd sent. I was nervous, but also a bit proud of what we'd done, since I had quite a bit of experience with Adobe products. I knew our video was probably a level above the other groups. But then the video started playing, and my heart sank. That wasn't our work. Instead, a completely pixelated video appeared of someone wearing a Scream movie mask. And worse, the person wasn't just standing there. They were talking saying horrible things about me, about the professor, about the government. It was disgusting. I can't even repeat what was said because it was so disturbing. My professor let the video play longer than he should have, probably because he was also in shock. When he finally paused it, he was completely pale. I, on the other hand, was paralyzed. I'd never felt so humiliated in my life. I just sat there frozen. I wanted to cry, but simply couldn't. I could barely breathe. It was like all the eyes in the room were glued to me. I knew exactly what they were thinking. After the most agonizing seconds I'd ever lived through, I snapped out of my state of shock and started crying before running out of the classroom. A panic attack was forming. I thought about going straight home, but I knew that if I ran away completely, I'd definitely be expelled. So very reluctantly, I waited outside the building until class was over so I could talk to the professor. I basically begged him, explaining that I had no idea what had happened and that I was sure I'd sent the right video. He decided to listen to me and confirmed that 2 files had been sent. The first was my project, and the most recent was what he'd opened in class. Sorting everything out with the university was time-consuming and a lot of work, but in the end, I managed it. I won't bore you with the details. However, nothing would erase the humiliation of that day. It also became clear that my email had been hacked, which was obviously a much bigger problem. I changed my password and thought I just had really bad luck. But that's when things got really worse. Less than a week later, I woke up logged out of Snapchat. This only happens when someone else logs in, so clearly my profile had been hacked too. I don't even want to imagine what they might have found there. There were several things on my Snapchat that I don't even like to talk about. I called the police, told them everything that was happening, and to my surprise, David agreed to be questioned. The police were able to confirm that he wasn't involved in this. However, he admitted that he'd posted some of my personal information on an online forum right after our breakup. He swore he never shared any of my passwords, but since I used the same password for everything and they were pretty easy to guess, that put me at risk. The police told me they couldn't do much since David wasn't responsible for the hacking. It was at that moment that the real weight of the situation hit me. Someone had access to practically all my private information. They could even blackmail me if they wanted to. I changed my passwords immediately, but it might have been too late. A few weeks passed, and so far nothing had happened. My best guess was that whoever was tormenting me realized I'd involved the police and decided not to risk getting caught. I thought this nightmare had finally ended. Of course, it wasn't the end. One day, a random person added me on Snapchat, which honestly isn't that uncommon. But when I accepted, they started sending me photos of me. I'm sure you can imagine the type of photos I'm talking about. I blocked the contact before they had a chance to threaten me, but I knew that's exactly what they were going to do. I broke down in tears. I'd never felt so powerless in my life. For about a week, random profiles kept adding me on Snapchat. I knew it was the same person, but I never accepted the requests, afraid of being blackmailed or asked for money. This has been happening for a few days now, and I honestly don't know what to do. I don't have any proof, no way to find out who this person is. The police don't have enough information to get involved, and I don't even think they could do much even if they wanted to. The worst part is that this person literally knows where I live and everything about my life. If I keep ignoring the Snapchat requests, they might end up doing something more serious. They've already been lurking around my apartment. I wouldn't be surprised if they're capable of going further. I can only hope they get tired of this and leave me alone. For any young people who might be reading this, please be careful with the type of photos you keep on your phone. I don't know if this nightmare will ever end. This was supposed to be one of the last, if not the very last delivery of the night for me. I was working at a pizzeria called Giovanni's, and one of my managers, Robert, was on the night shift with me. He decided who would make which deliveries. An order had come in for some regular pizzas, and he handed me a piece of paper with the customer's address and phone number. This was in 2009. Back then, I didn't have a cell phone with GPS, just a basic flip phone. I also didn't have one of those Garmin GPS devices, so I still depended on a physical paper map to navigate deliveries. The street for this last delivery had a name like Maple Ridge Road. I don't remember the house number or the name on the order, but I clearly remember how difficult it was to find the place. The delivery was in a very rural town, surrounded by forests, farmland, and more forests. The lack of street lighting only made it more complicated. I had to stop several times, turn on the car's interior light, and check the map again. Whenever I couldn't find a house, it was very stressful. I was on a really quiet, dark, and confusing road when I decided to simply call the number on the paper my boss had given me. The phone rang several times, and it seemed like there wasn't even voicemail. It must have rung about 10 times before someone answered. I was expecting them to say hello, but since nobody said anything, I spoke first. Then a voice on the other end responded. It was a deep, low voice, but very smooth. I said I was a pizza delivery driver and was having trouble finding their house. He explained that the entrance was easy to miss, that it looked like just a dirt trail. He spoke very slowly, with a monotone voice, describing the surroundings of the entrance so I could find it. And eventually, I did find it. I turned my car onto that very narrow dirt trail. It really was easy to miss. It took about 30 seconds, driving very slowly and carefully, until I saw a small one-story house appear. A weak orange glow was coming from inside, and I could see through the window. I parked my car next to the only other vehicle I could see, an old, beat-up pickup truck. I grabbed the 2 pizzas from the passenger seat and went to the front door of the house. I looked for a doorbell but couldn't find one, so I knocked on the door. You could hear muffled music coming from inside. After a while, I heard footsteps approaching the door, stopping for about 10 seconds. Then the door opened just a little bit, and I could only see part of the person's face, literally just one eye peeking out. I said somewhat nervously, "Hey, you ordered pizza, right?" And the guy answered, "Oh yes, the pizza." I recognized the voice from the phone call. There was a strange pause. I didn't know what else to say besides, "Do you have the money?" He answered, "Yes, I'll get it." He stepped away from the door, and I heard his footsteps going to another room. Some really old music from the 30s was playing, which made the atmosphere even weirder and more uncomfortable. as if it wasn't enough already. Then the door started opening slowly by itself, revealing more and more of that dimly lit room. Everything inside the house seemed incredibly old. There were metal sheets on the floor, probably covering holes. The sofa looked like it was from another century. Actually, all the furniture had that same air of antiquity, and the music was coming from an old record player, one of those with a huge horn on top. That's all I could see at first, just peeking curiously inside. But what really bothered me was the smell. There was a smell of death in there. I waited, trying to be respectful, while the guy got the money from wherever he'd gone. When enough time had passed for the situation to start getting strange, I knocked on the open door, looked inside, and said, "Sir." His voice came from another room. "Yes. Would you mind coming to the kitchen, please? My coworkers and bosses always said to never enter anyone's house unless it was really necessary, important advice that I'd never forgot." In that situation, I heard what the man said, but I still asked, "Sorry, can you repeat that?" He repeated, "Could you come to the kitchen, please?" I took a step inside and honestly felt like my feet would go through the floor. The house was so old that the floor sank a little as I walked. It had a very linear layout. When I looked to the right, I saw the kitchen entrance where his voice was coming from. On the other side, to the left, was a narrow hallway with several doors along the right side. At the end of the hallway was a guy with his back to me, dancing slowly in a scary way. He was really feeling it, and I don't mean in the sense of being confident. I mean he was literally touching his own body, while moving in an incredibly disturbing way. In any other situation, I would have laughed, but I was completely disturbed by the type of house I'd just entered. I turned and looked toward the kitchen, still holding those 2 pizza boxes. I took a few steps toward the kitchen, until I finally noticed a person peeking from behind the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. It was that man's face again, showing only about a quarter of his face, with just one eye spying on me in a frightening way. The only thoughts that went through my head at that moment were what the hell and should I just leave? I repeated what I'd said at the front door moments before, asking again if he had the money. The man didn't respond. He started laughing, or I don't even know if you could call it laughter, because it was a mixture of deep and high-pitched, but at the same time, very subtle and soft. Then suddenly he said, "Randall," in a surprisingly loud voice, much stronger and more authoritative than that calm, monotone voice from before. I was at my limit of how much weirdness I could handle. I turned and started walking back to the front door. And as I looked down the hallway while almost leaving, I noticed that the guy who'd been dancing seconds ago was now simply standing there staring at me. I went out the front door and closed it behind me. I quickened my pace to the car, still holding the pizzas. For some reason, I threw the pizza boxes on the passenger seat and got in the car as fast as possible. As I was backing up to get around the pickup next to me and make a 3-point turn, I looked back at the house and saw that the door was completely open again. My heart started racing with the idea that one of them could be outside, about to try to open one of the car doors. Maybe they were out there and I'll never know. But I managed to get down that dirt trail and back to the road. I needed to get back to the pizzeria. I called Robert to tell him what happened. He wasn't mad at me. When I got to the pizzeria, everyone laughed when I told the story. I can see how it sounds funny telling it to others, But at the time, it wasn't funny at all. Whatever was happening in that house wasn't normal, and I doubt they really wanted to buy pizza. After that, I had several dreams where I saw that man's face peeking from behind a wall, and I never entered anyone's house or apartment again while making deliveries. I was doing deliveries for DoorDash for a while during that period when I was struggling to pay my student loans. So I was pushing myself to make as much money as possible. I was still living with my parents during that phase. On one of those nights, I picked up an order from a fast food restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina, and went to deliver it to a house that was about 20 minutes away. I preferred to do these deliveries and longer runs later since the pay was better, and I could also do more since there was no traffic. At that moment, I was already on my way to the destination. I left the busier part of the city and headed to a quieter area full of forests and farms. Most of the roads there were completely dark, and by that time there were practically no cars around. I left the main road and entered a side street with a dead-end sign. That's where the directions led me to the order's address. I ended up at the last house on the street. The lights in almost all the small houses along the way were off, leaving everything in complete darkness, including the house where I was supposed to make the delivery. I left my car's headlights on to see something and avoid tripping over anything on the way. I used my phone's flashlight to guide me to the house's porch. I'm not exaggerating when I say there wasn't a single light on. The tall grass brushed against my legs as I made my way to the front door. This seemed strange. I pressed the doorbell button but didn't hear anything, so I knocked on the door. The customer had chosen the contact delivery option, which meant I needed to deliver it personally to him or her. I sent a message to the customer saying I was at the front door and asking if they could confirm the address. They read it immediately and responded, "Give me a second." I just replied, "Okay." They read it again. I waited in the dark, looking at the house windows, hoping some light would turn on inside. In my head, I could only think, this can't possibly be the right place. I insisted, asking if they could type out their address. I saw they started typing, but it took a while until they responded. "I see you. You're in the right place." Soon after, I noticed there was no car nearby. That seemed very strange. I asked the customer to confirm what car they were seeing outside. They said they saw my lights. Well, that basically confirmed I was in the right place, but the situation was still weird. I started moving away from the door a bit just because I didn't want to be standing right there when they opened it. But the door never opened. No matter how many times I tried messaging through the DoorDash app, I was already starting to suspect this was some kind of scam to get free food. That's when I heard a voice coming from the darkness around me. A man called out, "Over here." I started swinging my flashlight in all directions, trying to illuminate whoever had spoken. I said, "I'll leave the food on the front porch here." The voice repeated, "Over here." I had no idea who I was talking to and couldn't see anyone either. Fear took over me. I thought I was about to be attacked, so I went back to the car, trying not to run in a way that would draw attention. When I finally got to the car, I heard that unmistakable sound of air escaping. It was the sound of a flat tire. I looked quickly and saw that both tires on the left side were slashed and losing air. At that moment, I assumed the ones on the right side must have been damaged too. I got in the car as fast as I could and locked the doors. On the dashboard, all 4 tires showed low pressure alerts. Panic started taking over. I didn't know whether I should call the police and wait in the car or run through the dark to a nearby house. I was almost deciding on the second option. I turned off the headlights, ready to get out, when I noticed there was someone standing outside my window. I let out a desperate scream and immediately realized there were at least 4 people around the car, 1 at each window. They were all wearing masks, covering their faces. I was surrounded. One of them yelled for me to get out of the car immediately. I didn't know if any of them were armed, but I was sure that if I tried to start the car and escape with 4 flat tires, they would have killed me before I could get out of there. I yelled through the window asking if they just wanted to rob me, and one of them replied that if I handed over everything I had, they'd let me go. I agreed, unlocked the door, and the next instant, the man outside opened the door and violently pulled me out. From then on, I was beaten and kicked by at least 3 of them. They took everything, my smartwatch, my shoes, my wallet, my phone, and even some things that were in the car's glove compartment. I was left to fall on the ground while all the men ran into the darkness, and I was left there alone. The next thing I remember is waking up probably about 30 minutes later, still lying in the grass next to the car. They even took my keys. I managed to get up and walk toward the nearest light source I spotted, a little house at the end of the street near the main road. I rang the doorbell several times until someone answered from the other side of the door. I said I was robbed and injured. I need to use a phone. Luckily, the woman was understanding and let me use the phone to call the police, and then roadside assistance to tow my car. Finally, I called my dad. When the police arrived, I went back with them to where the car was, and they did a brief investigation, collecting all the information I could provide. After the tow truck took my car away, my dad arrived to pick me up and take me home. We left as soon as the car was towed. The last location of my phone was recorded on the street where everything happened, and it hasn't been turned on since that night, which probably means they destroyed it. The next day, I gave more information to some detectives about my DoorDash account, and they quickly traced the customer's account to a guy named Derek. To summarize, he claimed to have lost his phone and wallet, and whoever found or stole them was the one who used his account to order the delivery with the intention of robbing me. What I mean is that the person who did this ended up getting away with it. The house where they set everything up was an empty house for sale. My car's tires were covered by insurance, but I had to pay for the rest of my losses out of pocket. It was an expensive and painful lesson, but also valuable. I will never, ever be so naive in a situation like that again. I stayed away from deliveries for a few months, but then I went back. Only now I only do them during the day. Noah moved with his family to a very rural area in Montana, but we never lost contact. His family is pretty country, kind of backwoods, so this move didn't even surprise me. They always loved me, and whenever I visit, I'm very well received. Now at 19, I'm in college while Noah works with his dad. The family has a huge property there. I'd been there before. This wasn't my first time. It was a fall weekend, and I was going to spend those days at their house. Noah's mom and sister wouldn't be there, just him and his dad. The trip there is long, almost 5 hours, passing through many farms and open fields. To get to the property, you have to take a gravel road that's a bit off the main highway. When I arrived, Noah and his dad were in the yard waiting for me, already having some beers. After taking my bag out of the car, I joined them. Noah was telling me about all the trails in the area where we could test my Toyota 4Runner doing off-road. I'd never done this before, but I was super excited. His dad grilled some burgers for us and then went to visit a friend. After that, Noah and I got in my car, and he took me to a trail nearby that he said was perfect for off-roading. The sun was already starting to set, so we only had a few hours of light. We spent about an hour exploring various trails, all near Noah's house. When it started getting darker, we decided to go back to the road, because in the middle of the forest it gets much darker. While driving and passing several farms, we saw an abandoned building that looked like it was a church, with a huge cornfield next to it. Noah commented that he always passes by there, but never explored the place, and that's what we did. Of course, we decided to come back there later to take a look, but he suggested we go by bicycle. His family has several mountain bikes, all equipped with lights and everything. We went back to Noah's house. He grabbed a backpack and threw in a bottle of tequila and a Sprite along with some flashlights. We took the 2 best bicycles they had there, each with night lights on the handlebars. He mentioned that the bike ride to the abandoned building wouldn't be very long, which was fine with me since we'd always been pretty fit since high school. When we got there, it was already quite dark, and that's when the flashlights made a difference. The grass around was pretty tall too. We took a look to make sure no cars were passing before entering the property, just as a precaution. We hid the bicycles a bit inside the cornfield, so nobody would notice. There was still enough light outside to walk around without turning on the flashlights. We wanted to be discreet and not draw too much attention. We were thinking about taking some cool photos of each other to post on Instagram, if we could find a way to get inside the building. The place was definitely an old church. The shape of the windows made that pretty clear. We looked through one of the windows, but it was too dark to see anything inside. I asked Noah to pass me a flashlight. When we turned on the flashlight, everything changed completely. Now we could see inside. We both noticed something strange on the benches. It looked like someone's head hunched over, sitting with their back to us. Noah said it must be a mannequin, since it was completely motionless. We made a bet as a joke. He thought it was a mannequin, and I was betting it was some drunk person sleeping. We went to the front door and saw it was all boarded up with planks. Noah shook the door just to test it, but there was no way to open it. He laughed, saying this proved he'd won, because a homeless person would never be able to get in. I said, "Hold on, let's take a look at other windows. Maybe we can see better." We walked to the other side of the church to a window that gave us a better angle of what we'd seen before. But when I illuminated again with the flashlight, whatever had been on that bench had simply disappeared. I told Noah he owed me money because I was right, but I confess that also gave me a big chill. He asked, where did he go then? So I started illuminating around until we both saw at the same time and got scared. The man was standing right to the left of the window on the inside, looking straight at us. He definitely didn't look like a vagrant. We ran back to the cornfield, desperately trying to find the bicycles, but we couldn't. Now it was so dark that we avoided turning on the flashlights so as not to draw attention. Suddenly, we heard a noise coming from the church. It sounded like a door slamming. Noah told me to be quiet because he heard something in the cornfield, like someone was pushing through the plants while walking. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Total silence. Not even a breeze. The plants were completely motionless. We stayed there crouched, afraid to make any movement. We stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity until Noah whispered, "Which way did we leave the bicycles?" And that's when we heard the plants a few meters away being pushed, as if someone was running in our direction. I said, "Run," and we shot out through the cornfield with plants hitting my face as we ran. At some point, we came out of the cornfield and ran to an open field, going straight back to the road. Nobody was behind us anymore. Noah called his dad right away, and he came to pick us up. He's not the type of dad who gets mad about trespassing or drinking or anything like that. Actually, he was more irritated that we'd left the bicycles behind. But he agreed we'd done the right thing by dropping everything and running. The next day, he took us back to that church and brought his gun with him just as a precaution. We searched through the plants until we found the bicycles and threw them in the bed of his pickup truck. When we were ready to leave, we took one last look at the church and saw someone at one of the windows. It could only be the same person. I think when he realized we saw him, he stepped away from the window in a really scary way. Noah's dad said, "Let's get out of here," and you could see that really got to him. And to scare Noah's dad, who's pretty tough, it had to be something serious. After that, we went to a barbecue restaurant, ate a lot, and had some drinks. Later, Noah's dad called some number in town to report that there was someone in that abandoned church. At least we did our part, and they found out. Now who knows if that man is still hiding in that church, or who he was after all. I live on a farm together with my brother and his wife. During the busier periods, we divide the tasks, but in the off-season, they usually travel quite a bit. My fiancé passed away a few years ago, and since then, I still haven't been able to open myself up to the world again. I end up spending a lot of time alone, and these quieter times really weigh on me. This happened in early October, just before our last harvest. My brother Mark and his wife were out of town for a few days. Now imagine that something like this happened just when I was alone, holding down the fort. It was a night like any other. The windows were still open, letting the cool October breeze into the house. From outside, I suddenly heard a scream. It was a female voice, but I couldn't tell if it was from a teenager or an adult woman. I just know it was a high-pitched, shrill scream. I got up from the armchair and went to the gun safe in my bedroom to get my rifle. I went outside and was greeted by the cold, windy night air. I stood for a moment on the front porch, waiting, and heard the scream again. It was coming from the cornfield. I fired a shot into the air as a warning. At that moment, I didn't know what was happening. It could be someone in danger, or just a group of teenagers fooling around. Right after I fired the shot, I heard a female voice scream, "Help," before everything went silent. I called out, "Who's there? Where are you?" but only the wind answered. Now I turned on all the exterior lights of the house and grabbed my cell phone to call 911 while walking toward the cornfield, calling and hoping someone would respond. After telling the operator what I'd heard, I waited for the police to arrive. In total, 4 officers came, and with their help, we checked the cornfield, illuminating with flashlights and shouting, trying to find whoever needed help. I imagine that whenever someone reports cries for help, the police take it a bit more seriously. Since we found nothing, one of the officers told me to call again if I heard any other calls for help, and that they'd stay in the area. After that, everyone left. I went back inside the house, but not before taking another look at the cornfield. I closed the door and turned off all the lights. Here in the county, there isn't much for kids to do, so it wouldn't be surprising if it was just some teenagers trying to scare farmers or homeowners. After another hour watching TV, I decided to go upstairs to sleep. I took some melatonin pills to help since I suffer from chronic insomnia. I'd usually say this is bad luck. After about an hour, I started hearing creaking and banging coming from downstairs. Only then did I realize I'd never closed the windows downstairs. The walls of this house are thin as paper. You can hear everything, and the floors make noise all the time. I grabbed my cell phone and called my brother Mark. He answered and I asked, almost whispering, "Are you home?" He said no. At that instant, I felt all the hair on my body stand up, and I knew my body was already in fight or flight mode. I told him there was someone in the house and asked him to call the police for me. Since he was in a neighboring town, the request would go to the same dispatch center. He didn't ask anything, just said he'd call and hung up. I walked on tiptoe, trying to be as quiet as possible, to the safe and got my shotgun. I know I ended up making some noise as I approached. It was impossible to avoid it. I heard more sounds coming from downstairs. I was sure now there was someone in my house. I approached the door and opened it slowly. I looked at the stairs leading downstairs. I could still feel the breeze passing through the house. The hair on my arms remained standing. I started down the stairs very slowly, one step at a time, trying as much as possible not to make noise. But I only went down a few steps before I heard footsteps on the wooden floor downstairs, approaching the stairs, until a tall, thin figure appeared at the bottom of the steps. I cocked the shotgun and said, "Don't move," but he didn't even react. With an almost unsettling calm, he moved out of my line of sight, and soon I heard his footsteps speeding up, as if he were running through the living room toward the back door. I yelled, "Stop," while I tried to go after him for a moment, but as soon as he left the house, I closed the door and called my brother. He told me the police were already on their way. I locked all the first-floor windows and waited for the officers to return. They were the same ones from before. They did a new search around the property, this time with all the lights on. One of them said he'd keep watch during the night, although I doubt that guy would come back after realizing I was armed. And indeed, he never returned. But the story doesn't end here. While I was finishing the last harvest of the season on the combine harvester, I noticed a shoe in the middle of the field. I stopped the machine and went over to pick it up and take a look. It was a women's shoe, size 8. That reminded me of the screams I'd heard the night before, and the man invading my house a few hours later. A few hours later, I called 911 once more and left the shoe exactly where it was so as not to compromise any possible evidence. When the police arrived, they did another search of the cornfield and took the shoe as evidence for a possible disappearance case. They even brought sniffer dogs to try to follow some trail. The strangest thing is that there was no record of missing women in our county, at least not at that time. I just hope that whoever owns that shoe is alive to this day. Just thinking about the possibility of someone being murdered on my farm makes my stomach turn. When we were kids, our family had a special place to spend vacations in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And when I say our family, I'm referring to me and my 3 brothers. About this vacation place, well, it was actually a 3-bedroom trailer. It wasn't luxurious at all, but it was an important part of our childhood and still holds memories that make us smile. Whenever we left the main road and started seeing the farms around us, we already knew we were almost there. I'm the second oldest, and at that time I can say we were 14, 12, 10, and 8 years old. The trailer was simple, but at least it had electricity. The television was pretty old, but it worked for us to connect our PlayStation and play a bit. We'd been going there for so long that we had our favorite spots, a big playground at an elementary school where we played hide and seek while our parents relaxed reading magazines, and a little market that was also one of our favorite places to spend time. We loved exploring the forests that surrounded the property. The nearest neighbors were a good walk away, but still not so far that our parents worried about letting us go. That was the first year our youngest brother Todd could explore with us, while our parents stayed comfortable in the trailer. We took a different path that branched off from the end of the main road. It's worth mentioning that hardly any cars passed there, since our trailer was at the end of a long road that ended in a dead end. So the only traffic came from the few people who lived there. There was always this house, with a somewhat dubious-looking farm at the top of a hill that overlooked the road. Curiously, in all the years we'd been there, we never saw any car parked there. The house was surrounded by a small cornfield, suggesting someone lived there. But the strange thing was we never saw anyone, no car, no person. Among the trees around the property, the 2 buildings, the barn and the cornfield, we realized that place was perfect for a game of hide and seek. The sun was already shining in the sky. We decided that Alex, our oldest brother, would be it first, and we'd follow the order from oldest to youngest. The rest of us ran to hide. I went straight into the crops. I heard Alex say, "Ready or not, here I come." Then I sat among the yellowed plants, completely out of sight. I stayed there waiting and waiting, until I heard the rustling of dry leaves and heavy footsteps crushing the ground. I didn't know which of my brothers was nearby, but I didn't want to take any chances. I ran from the crops to the grass, going up the hill toward the red barn. I expected Alex to come after me, but he didn't appear, so I thought it must be one of my younger brothers. Soon I heard a commotion. Alex was chasing my other younger brother, James, down the hill on the other side of the house. They were both running, laughing and screaming. Alex caught him, and with that, James was out of the game. I stayed hidden behind the barn until I saw Todd leaning against the back wall of the house, looking at me with a smirk on his face. I signaled for silence, and that's when I heard someone in the crops. But it wasn't one of us. Alex found Todd easily and without difficulty, then spotted me since I was right in his line of sight. I ran down the hill, taking advantage of the speed the descent gave me. But Alex also gained momentum, and being bigger and faster, he caught me easily. The four of us gathered at the bottom of the hill, near the road. I was supposed to be it next, but I decided to ask if anyone else had hidden in the crops. When everyone said no, I got a chill. I told them I'd heard someone walking around there and suggested it might be the homeowner, so we'd better leave. With that, we left quickly and walked back to the trailer where our parents were in the living room watching a movie. For dinner, we went to our favorite pizzeria, the one we all loved. I remember that night our dad mentioned that nobody lived in that house where we'd been playing. It had been abandoned for years. It was dark when we returned, and we knew we wanted to play flashlight tag. Our mom didn't want to let Todd go out after dark, and I'm sure they only let us go because Alex, at 14, was considered old enough to take care of us. So the three of us went back to that house for the game, which was basically hide and seek. But if the seeker illuminated someone with the flashlight, that person was out of the game. When we got there again, it was about 90% dark. This time they wanted me to be it, since Alex had been in the last round. I turned around, counted to 60, and said, "I'm coming." I kept the flashlight off, trying not to give away my location. I could barely see enough to move, but that was part of the fun. I ran up the hill toward the house, which was completely dark. I looked around the walls and the barn, but saw no sign of anyone. I looked at the trees and decided to turn on the flashlight to illuminate the tree line. Nothing there either, so I turned off the light again. I was sure someone would be hiding in the cornfield. It was the most obvious place, and it wasn't that big, so it would be easy to take a look. I got to the bottom of the hill, approached the cornfield, and started entering slowly, trying not to make too much noise. I still kept the flashlight off, so as not to give away my position. It was only then that I realized how scary that place got at night. While I moved through the plants, I heard footsteps inside. If I wanted to catch them, I'd need to be quick and sneaky. I focused on the sounds, and when the footsteps seemed to be very close, I turned on the flashlight and said, "Got you." But all I saw was someone's back running away from the light. "Who is it?" I asked. "You're out." That's when I heard a weird laugh. It wasn't my brother's laugh, and didn't even sound like a child's. It had the disturbing tone of an adult. I froze, just moving my hand to move the flashlight, trying to understand who was there. I heard the smooth voice of an adult man say, "Can I play with you guys?" Then I saw his face. It was partially covered by the plants that still separated us, but what little I could see seemed deformed. I really couldn't tell if he was wearing a mask, or if that was his real face. I ran out of the crops screaming my brothers' names. "Run! The game's over." Soon I heard both of them responding from where they were hiding. I saw them coming down the hill at full speed, with their flashlights on. I turned mine on too, and yelled for them to keep running. We ran non-stop down the road until we reached our property, completely out of breath. When we calmed down, I told them about the scary, deformed man I'd seen in the crops. I also said he must be the person I'd heard earlier. I still remember the expressions on their faces when they heard this. When we told our parents, they seemed confused. My dad didn't know what to say. and my mom was quick to make it clear that she didn't want us leaving the property after dark anymore. To be honest, I didn't want to either. That night was hard to sleep. I kept thinking, what if that man is out there hidden in the darkness, looking through one of the windows? I know I scared everyone a bit with my description of the man. I had no reason to make it up, and my parents knew that. Needless to say, we never went back to that house on the road. Fortunately, it wasn't very close to our property. My family ended up selling the place just a few years later. The first time I laid eyes on that old Victorian house on Maple Street in Salem, Oregon, it looked like something straight out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories tall with weathered brick walls and ivy crawling up the sides. It was a house that had clearly seen better days. The massive windows, framed by dark wooden shutters, hinted at the age of the place, and all the stories it must have witnessed over the past century and a half. It was the perfect combination of charm and mystery, and the price was too good to pass up. Looking back, that suspiciously low asking price should have been my first red flag. Moving day was a whirlwind of cardboard boxes, scattered furniture, and pure exhaustion. When the sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, I found myself surrounded by half-unpacked boxes in what would become my living room. The soft glow of a single lamp cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, and the house creaked and groaned as it settled for the night, as if it were letting out a long, weary sigh from walls that had witnessed far too much. Before calling it a night, I decided to explore the attic. The narrow staircase groaned under my feet as I climbed, and when I pushed open the heavy wooden door, a cloud of dust rose to greet me. I fumbled in the darkness, searching for a light switch, until my fingers found an old pull cord. With a gentle tug and a soft click, the weak light from a fluorescent bulb illuminated the space. Before me, the attic was crammed with antique furniture, forgotten trunks, and all sorts of relics from bygone eras. As I rummaged through the piles, my eyes fixed on a small, weathered box half hidden in the far corner. It was covered in cobwebs and looked like it had been sitting there untouched for decades. Curiosity got the better of me. I dragged the box to the center of the attic and carefully lifted its creaking lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed newspaper from 1953, was an antique Mickey Mouse doll. It was clearly from decades past, with faded fabric and a fixed smile painted on its plastic face. One of its button eyes was slightly crooked, giving the toy a strange and unsettling appearance. There was something about it that intrigued me. Despite its worn condition, I couldn't quite understand what it was, but something told me I needed to take that doll out of the attic. Following that strange impulse, I climbed down from the attic and returned to the living room. I carefully placed the doll in the center of the built-in bookshelf, to the left of the fireplace. There was an identical shelf on the other side, where I had already begun organizing some of my own belongings. After adjusting Mickey to what seemed like the perfect position, I stepped back and observed. His cheerful smile made me smile too, and for a few minutes I stood there lost in thought. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, bringing me back to reality, and I headed to bed. A week passed, and I was beginning to feel comfortable in my new home. Mickey remained right in the center of the shelf, and I had added some teddy bears I'd kept for nostalgia, plus a porcelain doll my mother had called Julia since I was a child. Strangely, during that week, these objects kept falling from the shelf for no apparent reason. One night, I almost watched Julia break. I was about to go to bed when I heard a thud coming from the direction of the fireplace. I was surprised to see that the doll had fallen on its side and was slowly sliding off the shelf. I ran to catch it before it shattered on the floor. With Julia safe in my hands, I heard another dull sound and turned to see Mickey had also fallen. His plastic face turned toward the shelf, while his button eyes seemed fixed directly on me. A chill ran down my spine. Without thinking much, I gathered the other bears and took them all, along with Julia, to my bedroom. As soon as I closed the door behind me, I carefully placed my childhood toys on the bed. For the first time since moving in, I used the large, ornate key that was in the lock and secured the door, just to be safe. I kept the key in a drawer in my dresser. I knew I was being irrational, but what had happened with Mickey downstairs had left me completely terrified. It seemed like he was deliberately pushing any other toy off the shelf, as if he wanted to make it clear that space was his alone. Despite my fear, I didn't get rid of Mickey immediately. Maybe I wanted to see if something else would happen, or maybe I was simply too scared to approach him. After that night, I began avoiding the living room at all costs, staying only in the kitchen or going straight to my bedroom when I came home from work. Since my bedroom had its own bathroom, once I locked myself in there, I knew I could spend the entire night without having to come out until the next morning. That's not to say that locking the door prevented strange things from continuing to happen. One morning, something woke me very early. I blinked, still drowsy, and sat up in bed. The soft light of dawn was beginning to filter into the room through the gaps in the curtains. That's when I heard the sound that had awakened me, a soft thud from outside my bedroom door. All sleepiness vanished instantly, and I found myself staring at the door. The sound repeated. It sounded like something small hitting against the wood. The noise came again, this time louder, and I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. Then silence settled for a moment before a high-pitched, strange laugh echoed from the other side of the door. It didn't sound human, and soon the laughter grew louder, taking on a maniacal tone. Suddenly, the door handle began to shake violently, and I screamed like a frightened child. I hid under the covers, covering my ears and hoping it was all just a nightmare. The laughter continued echoing while I huddled there. I don't know how long it lasted, but the next thing I remember is waking up to complete silence. I quickly emerged from under the covers and looked at the clock. It was past 11 in the morning. Thank goodness it was the weekend. I listened carefully, and around me I could only hear the normal sounds of an old house. My bedroom door remained closed and locked, and I threw myself back on the bed with a sigh of relief. I knew I had heard and felt all of that, but part of me began to question whether it hadn't just been a nightmare. I mean, a doll falling from the shelf was strange enough, but sinister laughter and Mickey trying to get into my room, that was a completely new level of madness. Over the past few days, I had checked the house cautiously just to make sure there wasn't an intruder around. However, all the doors and windows were still securely locked, and Mickey was back in his place on the shelf, staring at me with that disturbing smile of his. I don't really know what to do now. Should I spend some time in a hotel? If that night really happened, maybe it would give things time to calm down and return to normal. Or if I'm really going crazy, maybe getting away from here would help reset my mind. But what if the best thing really is to get out of this house once and for all and sell it as soon as the opportunity arises? I'm sitting here in the living room trying to ignore this uncomfortable feeling that something is wrong. I only turned around for a second, but I swear Mickey moved his head. It wasn't turned that way before. You know what? Tonight I'm going to look for a hotel. I can't stay here another night, wondering what that thing might do next. As I write this, I can feel those button eyes watching me from across the room. The cheerful smile that once made me happy now feels like a threat. Whatever Mickey really is, whatever brought him to life in this old house, I know I can't face another night like the last one. Some antiques are better left in the past, and some dolls should never be brought down from the attic. I was 16 when my mother separated from my stepfather. We moved to a duplex with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms in a private airpark community in Clearwater, Florida. The layout of the place was quite simple. As soon as you entered, you could see the sliding glass door at the back. To the right were 3 doors, the first bedroom, then the main bathroom, and finally the master bedroom, which had its own bathroom. Each of these doors was about 8 feet apart from each other. The kitchen, living room, and dining room shared the same open space between the front door and the back door. Almost immediately, we began to notice strange things happening. It all started with the 3 doors slamming shut simultaneously, which truly frightened us the first few times it happened. Over time, we began to notice our yellow Labrador, Woody, acting strangely for no apparent reason. He seemed scared, and this became increasingly obvious. He would sit with his head turned toward the corner, as if trying to hide from something. At first, I simply denied what was happening, until one day after school, I ended up dozing off on the couch with Woody lying right in front of me. Suddenly, I woke up to my dog whimpering, as if something was hurting him. When I looked at him, I swear it seemed like someone or something was pulling his tail backward. In the midst of that panic, I didn't notice right away. But when I stood up, I felt the air around me was absurdly cold. Keep in mind this was summer in Florida, so this was far from normal. Additionally, a horrible smell of sulfur filled the environment, almost making me gag. This was the first time the entity tried to physically harm us, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. The paranormal phenomena continued throughout the first year. Our enormous sound system started turning on by itself, and the only sound that came out was static. If you listened closely enough, it seemed like you could hear people screaming in pain, as if there were millions of them. I was already certain that whatever it was something malevolent, so I began researching the history of the house. I discovered that the owner of the air park had a son involved in the deaths of several people, but he was never charged because they couldn't find sufficient evidence. I also discovered that he and 3 friends had lived in this house until his friends died prematurely. The autopsy showed that all 3 men died from drug overdoses, which wouldn't be so strange if not for the fact that none of them had a history of heavy drug use. That's when I began to believe they might have been drugged without knowing it. After investigating more about the deaths related to this guy in the past, I discovered they were all also from drug overdoses. That's when things really began to get worse in the house. The atmosphere became increasingly heavy and depressing. It was as if you could feel evil in the air, hovering over everything. More strange things began to happen. Suddenly, we found spiders and scorpions throughout the house, including poisonous spiders like black widows and brown recluses. It didn't take long for my mother to be bitten by one of these brown recluses. It seemed like everyone in that house was getting hurt or sick. My little brother caught a terrible eye infection that almost left him blind, and honestly could have even taken his life. Our poor dog was so disturbed that he barely came out of a corner except to eat and drink water. Shortly after my mother was bitten by the spider, I began to see things. At first, they were just shadows in the corner of my eyes, but then they transformed into human figures that would stand over me while I was in bed. I need to say that I don't believe this entity was the spirit of someone who died from an overdose in that place. I think it was something much more sinister, perhaps a demon that was trapped in the house because of all the horrible things that happened there. Over time, I felt the demon was getting closer and closer until it reached the point where it was right on top of me. I knew that thing was trying to possess me, and I needed to act. I didn't mention this before because it didn't make sense for the story until now. But the house had a 2-car garage that was between our side of the duplex and the neighbors. This meant we couldn't enter the garage from the house. We had to go outside, walk down the sidewalk, and open the garage door from the outside. When you opened the garage, the light switch was way in the back of the wall. Next to it were 2 buttons that opened the garage door, and they were illuminated by a small internal light, so you could see them even in the dark. That's how I could find the switch when I went to do laundry at night. For some reason, I always had the feeling that the malevolent energy from the house was concentrated in the garage. I never figured out why, but something told me that at least one of the men had died there. One night, as usual, I went out to do laundry. I opened the garage door and carefully searched for the light on the wall, trying not to hit the toolboxes and junk scattered on the floor. As I fumbled in the dark toward the switch, I noticed I couldn't see the usual light. It took me a few seconds to realize that the light was being blocked by an enormous dark mass. It was completely dark in there, but that mass was so much darker that even in total darkness it stood out. In the blink of an eye, the thing was right on top of me. I felt my entire body paralyze. That's when I began to distinguish some facial features: a mouth, ears, a nose. But what really horrified me were the eyes. I had heard other people describe a demon's eyes before. Some said they were red, others green, but they weren't like that. The eyes of the creature in front of me were the deepest and blackest I had ever seen in my life. Suddenly, I realized that was what was keeping me trapped, motionless. I don't know how, but I knew the control it had over me was in the eyes. In the center was a very pale, almost gray pupil, which made everything even more frightening. I felt that at any moment that thing would destroy me, and I thought there was absolutely nothing I could do. But then a childhood memory came to my mind. My grandmother telling me that if I ever found myself in front of something like that, I should rebuke it in the name of the Lord. At that instant, I doubted it would work, but what else could I do? So I began to murmur, "I rebuke you in the name of God," slowly and weakly at first, But gradually, I gained strength until I began to shout with all the voice I could muster. The creature didn't react until the last second. Suddenly, it recoiled and curled in on itself, letting out a sound I can only describe as a scream. It was like the howl of a Category 5 hurricane. The sound was so intense I could feel it in my body, as if I had been hit by a blast of freezing wind. Then the demon lunged at me and passed directly through me. The cold I felt when pierced by it is impossible to describe, but the pain felt like someone had shot my chest with a shotgun full of frozen needles. I fell to my knees, breathless. My arms were still covered in goosebumps from the cold, but without needing to look around, I knew the demon was gone. On impulse, I got up and ran into the house, startling my mother when I burst through the door. I kind of expected her to ask about the noise, but looking at her face, I realized she hadn't heard anything and had no idea what had happened. She asked me what was wrong, but for some reason I couldn't tell the truth. So I lied and told her I had been startled by something outside, but didn't know what it was. I didn't tell her until many years later, when we were far away from that house. She's still there, and I just hope the demon left for good that night in the garage. Some battles leave scars that never fully heal, and some houses hold darkness that should never be disturbed. Whatever that thing was, I pray no one else will ever have to face it in that garage, where evil seemed to make its home. I had just moved to a new house in Bend, Oregon, that was 112 years old. Being so ancient, many people had surely died there over the decades. Just a few days after moving in, I began to hear noises coming from upstairs. I went to take a look, but there was absolutely nothing there. Still, I kept wondering what could be causing those sounds. I returned to the living room to watch a movie with my sisters. After the movie ended, I went to bed, and once I was lying down, I heard footsteps coming from the attic. Frightened, I asked my father to see what it could be. He went up to check, but found nothing at all. He just said, "You must be having a nightmare." I decided to let it go, but the next day I saw something quite strange. I always take a shower at night when everyone is already asleep. One night while I was in the shower, something strange began coming out of the drain. It wasn't water, it was something else, a kind of black slime. I had no idea what it was. I called my father to take a look, but when he checked, he saw nothing abnormal except for a bunch of hair in the drain. There was nothing more to be done, so I went to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I noticed my sister wasn't in her bed. I went downstairs to the kitchen to see if she was there preparing breakfast, but I didn't find her. After searching the entire house and finding nothing, I began to worry seriously. 4 hours later, my parents had already called the police. She was officially missing. Everyone in the neighborhood mobilized to look for her, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Until, curiously, a month later, something happened. Now keep in mind that during that month, everything had been quite calm. Nothing strange happened in the house. But I began to think, what if that thing that was haunting the place had taken her? Finally, one afternoon, I was making new missing person posters, because the ones we had hung were being torn down every day by someone. That's when I heard a knock outside, a tap on my window. I opened it, and there was my sister. She was covered in blood and looked lost. I took her directly to my parents. The happiness of seeing that she was alive and well was immense. We notified the police and told the neighbors, and everyone was very relieved and happy. But something was different about my sister. I couldn't understand exactly what it was. I just knew she wasn't the same as before. The strangest thing is that she never told us what happened or how she disappeared. And because of her, my parents eventually stopped asking. We assumed her strange behavior was a consequence of having been missing for a month. The night she returned, she slept in my parents' room, so I ended up sleeping alone. I really wished she had slept with me. I had missed her so much. After that night, everything seemed to be returning to normal. But the sounds and voices I heard at night before she disappeared began to appear again, practically right after she came back. About 4 months after we found her, one night I heard a knock on my bedroom door. I opened it and saw my sister. She hugged me. My sister never hugs anyone. When she was a child, she suffered abuse, and since then avoided any kind of embrace. I found that very strange, but ignored it. Maybe she had also missed me, or was just scared after a bad nightmare. I asked what had happened. With a voice that didn't sound like hers, she told me she had had a nightmare, one where she disappeared again. To this day, we don't know how she vanished or if someone took her, and I really didn't know what to say. That night, she ended up sleeping with me. The next morning, when one of my parents woke up and didn't find her in their room, they panicked. But I opened the door and said she was there with me. I went to get her from the bed. When I climbed up to the top bunk, I didn't find her. She had disappeared, and that fear took hold of me again. I began searching everywhere, wondering where she had gone this time. I ran to my parents, swearing she was in my room. We began looking for her around the house, but we only found her almost an hour later, just before we decided to call the police again. She was hiding in the trees in the backyard. She said she was playing hide and seek with a friend. I found that very strange because my sister didn't have friends. She was never very social, always reserved and avoided physical contact. So we were surprised when she said she was playing hide and seek with a friend. I asked, "Since when do you have a friend? Can you tell me about her?" But she went completely silent and ran to our room. I couldn't get her to talk more about the subject. By that point, we had been living in the house for about a year, so the strange noises and sounds had already become almost normal. We were used to them. We heard them every day, every night, practically all the time. But one night was different. I was taking my usual shower, and that black slime began coming out of the shower again. I turned on all the faucets in the bathroom, and the same black slime began pouring from the sink and drain. It was coming out of everywhere. I got so scared that I started screaming. My father came running, asking what was happening. When I pointed to the faucet, of course, the black slime had disappeared. I tried to explain to him that I had seen the slime there minutes before, but he didn't believe me. My father never believed in these things, but I wasn't lying. Just to be safe, the next morning he went to check the pipes. At first, everything seemed normal, but when he reached the end of the pipe, he found wooden sticks, some jewelry, and ritual symbols. My father freaked out. He started yelling that we needed to get out of that house, but we couldn't buy another one or simply move. There was nowhere to go. We were trapped there. He took all the strange things, and put them on the living room floor. He took photos and searched Google to try to find out what it was. He found an image that matched. It was an ancient ritual, quite common in the past, but we didn't know exactly what it meant. We just knew it wasn't good. We decided to call a priest to see what was happening. He told us to leave the house for a while and went in. 4 hours later, he came out saying he had fought with something in there, something that had been living with us. The priest explained that he needed to purify both the house and each of us. We formed a line, and he began to smudge us with sage. My little sister began to freak out, hating the smell and thinking he was going to burn her. Then the priest said he had to spray holy water on all of us. We're not religious, we never were. But at that point we were desperate, willing to accept any help. My little sister, however, refused to let the holy water touch her skin, saying she was afraid it would burn her. We told her it wasn't acid or anything dangerous. It was just water, but she still refused to let the priest spray it. I found this very strange, especially since before she had been desperate for everything to end. In the end, we ended up skipping my little sister because of her complaints, but I became suspicious. From that moment on, I decided to keep a closer eye on her. Later that day, she said she needed to go to the bathroom. So I left her alone for a little while, but she was taking too long, so I went to see if everything was okay. When I opened the door, I saw something I wish I had never seen. My sister was floating in the air with black slime dripping from her eyes, and her mouth was completely open while she screamed. I ran desperately to call the priest, who was still talking with my parents. He came running and grabbed her, placing her sitting on the dining room table. He began to perform a real exorcism, and my sister screamed in pain the entire time. During the ritual, the priest asked questions, trying to talk to her, but what answered wasn't my sister. The voice that was definitely not hers said that my sister was no longer there, that she had been taken, and they would never return her. I held my sister and looked right into her eyes, but I knew I wasn't looking at my real sister. It was something else, a demon, an entity, something beyond. With tears in my eyes, I screamed as loud as I could, begging them to take me instead of her, to leave her in peace because she was innocent. After that, I don't remember much because I fainted. But I remember that before everything went black, I felt something strange inside me. When I came to, I realized my sister seemed different, but in a good way. She was terrified, screaming and crying, saying that something had taken her and that she didn't want to be taken again. Soon after, I discovered that marks had appeared on my skin. They looked like crosses carved into my body. My family rushed me to the hospital, but there they couldn't do much besides bandaging me. So we went straight to a church. I was placed on a red carpet, and they began to perform an exorcism on me. I trembled. I could feel fear taking over. Something inside me began to speak, saying I would have to do certain things to be freed, like stabbing the priest who was trying to expel it. I begged it not to make me do that, but the entity didn't care. It said that if I wanted to be free, I would have to obey. I gathered all the strength I had left. The voice inside me guided me, told me to look to the left where there was a large wooden cross with a sharp point. It ordered me to take it and stab the priest. I had never done anything like that, but the entity insisted that everything would be fine, that I would be freed. before I could obey, suddenly I woke up as if I had fainted again. This time I felt lighter, as if something had been taken from me, but I was still terrified. The first thing I did was look for my sister, just to make sure she was there and was okay. When I saw her, I ran to hug her so tight I almost suffocated her. After all these crazy events, things finally seemed to return to normal. But this time it was real normal. There were no more strange noises, no black slime coming from the pipes, nothing like that. We were a normal family again. A year later, my mother got pregnant, and when she gave us the news, we were super excited. We would have a new little sister. On the night my mother went into labor, the house suddenly became freezing cold. They rushed to the hospital, and after a long time, they returned with the baby. But as soon as she entered the house, she began to cry very loudly and wouldn't stop no matter what. We began to wonder if there was something wrong with her. I remember looking everywhere to try to calm her, but nothing seemed to work. Not even my mother's milk helped. The only way to make her stop crying was to take her outside the house. That's when we decided to go to my grandmother's house. My little sister simply couldn't stay inside the house. She would cry every time she entered. So Grandma's house became our only solution. My mother was completely exhausted. One night after finishing a work shift, she put my little sister in the car seat, but being so tired, she ended up forgetting her there. This was happening all the time, so when I saw she had forgotten the baby again, I called out, "Mom, you forgot the baby." I went to get my little sister myself, and that's when I saw something, a hand going toward the handle of the car seat, and I heard a voice say, "Go." But I refused to leave. I reached out to grab my sister, but she slipped from my hands, and suddenly I was thrown across the room by an invisible force. The stairs were right behind the car seat, and I ended up falling down them. The pain was intense, and I was terrified, screaming for my parents. My father came running and found me lying on the floor bleeding, covered in cuts and bruises. We went back to the church to talk to the priest. He said something had returned, but it wasn't the same entity that had entered me before. It was something that came with my little sister when she was born. We took the baby with us, and soon things began to get worse. She would faint repeatedly, and at one point we couldn't wake her up. While my mother held her, it seemed like something was trying to tear her from her arms. My mother was so weak she couldn't hold on, and the baby was taken. I swear I saw something carrying my sister, and we began searching for her everywhere. Our newborn, who was so innocent and had her whole life ahead of her, simply disappeared. We couldn't find her, but every night we heard her crying. She screamed as if she were asking for help. The disappearance lasted a month, just like my other sisters. We knew what was happening again, so we called the priest and explained that now it was our 1-month-old little sister. Finally, my father found her in the attic. He had gone up there to check and found her crying. In the environment, there were ritual items on the walls, and a strange crackling sound echoed through the place. My father ran out with my little sister in his arms, saying the entity didn't want to possess her, but rather keep her. He said he heard a voice in the attic saying they didn't want to take her body. They just wanted to stay with her. After that, my little sister was taken to the church along with my mother and my other sister. Only my father and I remained in the house. At one point, I went to take a shower, and instead of black slime, I swear blood began coming out of the shower. I ran out of the bathroom, and that's when I saw something that looked like my little sister. I walked slowly toward her, put my hand on her shoulder and said, "What are you doing here? You should be at the church." She turned around and screamed. At that instant, I knew that wasn't my sister. I remembered the bottle of holy water the priest had given us attached to a necklace. I ran to get the bottle and poured the water over that thing that looked like my sister. I screamed for it to go away, to disappear once and for all, and then it disintegrated. What remained was a puddle of black slime on the carpet. At that moment, I felt relieved, thinking we had finally ended it. My father took a jar and put the slime inside. We took it to the church, and the priest confirmed that we had removed whatever that thing was. When we went to check the attic, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Everything was as it should be. Now we're fine. My little sister Jane is great, and Scarlett too. She even hugs us much more frequently now. That was the most frightening moment of my life, and I just hope nothing like that ever happens again. Some houses hold secrets that should remain buried, and some entities should never be awakened. We learned that the hard way, but we survived, and that's what matters most. Since childhood, I had always been fascinated by paranormal themes and witchcraft. I was born in Tennessee in a small town that almost nobody knows. But it was on my 11th birthday that I began to wish that fascination had remained just curiosity. Since my birthday fell in a typically cold and snowy month, my aunt let me have a sleepover at her house every year. This time, 7 girls were invited, and 2 of them were my cousins. One of the girls I only knew because everyone said we looked identical. But she was 2 years younger, and we weren't even from the same family. Let me introduce them here. Amanda, my older cousin; Brenna, my younger cousin; Carla, the lookalike; Danielle, my best friend; Emma, the classmate who came up with the whole idea; Francine, the one who always tattled on everyone; and Gabby, the one who refused to participate. I had delved quite deeply into my ancestry, and grew up hearing stories and legends from my family, both from the Celtic side and the Cherokee Nation on my mother's side. Everyone seemed to have some kind of sensitivity or connection with the dead. Knowing this, they always warned me to never, under any circumstances, participate in a seance. The sensitivity we had could attract bad things, negative entities like moths flying to light. I should have listened. The party was kind of boring, until Emma suggested that a seance circle would be the perfect way to liven things up and turn the party into the best one ever. I knew what my family thought about this and wanted to say no, but I didn't want to be the party pooper or seem scared in front of my friends. To make this work, I convinced everyone to wait until the adults went to sleep. Until then, we decided to paint our nails and watch the latest episode of Ghost Adventures in my room to pass the time. It was a cold, clear night with only a small piece of crescent moon in the sky. We waited until all the adults were asleep to sneak out through the back door, which didn't happen until after 2:30 in the morning. We placed candles around the deck, evenly spaced, and stood there in the freezing temperature of -6 degrees in our fuzzy pajamas and coats, waiting for the witching hour that some say is at 3 in the morning. That's when we began. My aunt's house was surrounded by wide fields on both sides, with only 2 neighbors living directly behind in a 1-acre area. I knew they were elderly and undoubtedly already asleep. Maybe that's what made that night even stranger. There was no wind, and the only sounds you could hear were the neighbors' dogs, and us giggling softly amid the tranquility of nature around us. I went around lighting the candles one by one to prevent any of the girls from accidentally setting the deck on fire. That's when Gabby began to get nervous. "I don't like this, guys," she said, visibly worried. Gabby didn't look satisfied at all and muttered back in an irritated tone, "If you're going to act like a child, why don't you go back inside? It's obvious you've already passed your bedtime." With that attitude, some of the other girls laughed, but later regretted it. Gabby moved away and went to sit in a chair near the door. "I'm not scared, I just think this is all stupid." "Nothing's going to happen," she lied, and perhaps cursed us unintentionally. All of us formed a circle except Gabby. "We need to hold hands and remember, don't let go no matter what happens until we break the circle," I warned. I don't think any of them took me very seriously. They also didn't know how angry ghosts can be at 2 in the morning. I let Emma start. "If there's someone here, give us a sign." A pause and nothing happened. Emma began to get frustrated, becoming impatient. I said, "Give us a sign, don't ignore us." "You can wake everyone up," I scolded her. Suddenly, everything around us became frighteningly silent. I had always heard that when nature goes quiet like that, it's time to run and hide. "Nothing's happening," Carla commented emotionlessly. "Aren't you guys hearing that?" Danielle asked me, giving me a wide-eyed look. I gave a slight nod, confirming that I also felt something strange. "It's too quiet here," Amanda said the obvious, staring at me in a way that only candlelight made visible, as if saying we shouldn't have done this. Brenna gasped loudly. "Didn't you guys see that?" "See what?" Emma demanded while all of us began looking around. I was about to ask what had happened when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a quick flash of something passing by. And then suddenly, all the candles went out at the same time. There was no wind. Brenna began to cry, and did exactly what I had warned not to do. She let go of hands. "Brenna, I told you not to do that," I scolded her. Right after that, the candle next to me began to flicker again, lighting back up, which made all of us hold our breath. One by one, all the candles came back to life. That's when I felt an unwelcoming presence behind me. Both Amanda and Brenna, who were in front of me, now looked beyond me with expressions of pure terror. The other girls also looked terrified. I turned my head slowly and saw a tall, dark mass with a face that was just a white mask without eyes, mouth, or nose. It looked empty and was standing right behind me. All of us screamed at the same time. It responded with a terrible scream, the kind of sound that reminds you of nails scratching a blackboard. We ran inside as fast as we could, locking the doors. I had barely crossed the entrance when I looked over my shoulder and saw that thing trying to grab me. I screamed again, ran in and slammed the door, locking it with force. The instant I closed the door, our eyes met. With all the commotion, my aunt woke up and came running out of her room. "What did you do?" she yelled, clearly terrified. "I warned you never to do this." She ran to the storage room downstairs, grabbed a bundle of sage, and began smudging us quickly. The entity outside seemed furious, screaming and circling the house. You need to break the circle, my aunt instructed us. All of us held hands immediately. I break this circle. You have to go back where you came from. You can't stay here. Goodbye, we repeated these words until suddenly the world around us fell silent. That's when we heard the soft sound of a bird singing, which meant it was all over. Well, at least it was over for my friends. My aunt and I still had to do a complete cleansing on me and the property, trapping the thing that had tried to attach itself to me. What should have been a harmless game of talking to the dead almost turned into a demonic possession. If my aunt hadn't woken up in time, I might not be here to tell this story. Actually, it took several years until everything was finally resolved. To this day, I do a monthly cleansing and protection ritual, just to be sure. I have no idea what that thing was, and honestly, I never wanted to find out. Names have power to call these things back, so I think it's better this way. It's been 12 years since that night, and I can still feel the terror and adrenaline of that moment as if it were yesterday. Some doors should never be opened, and some games should never be played. We were just kids looking for a thrill, but we got much more than we bargained for. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, that thing might still be waiting for another group of curious children to invite it back into our world. Never underestimate the power of a curious child and a few candles. Sometimes the dead don't want to talk, they want to stay. And when they do, breaking free becomes a battle for your very soul. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.